Chapter 67 Visit After they left the house, the two went straight out. When they were outside, second Uncle Goose said, "Brother, look. Let's go and take a look. As long as we don't touch their sales channels, there shouldn't be any problems." Father Goo nodded. After he finished speaking, the two of them walked toward the end of the village. However, they were so frightened by Zhuang that they didn't dare go in. Gu Chungrui heard the dog barking and walked out. A cold smile flashed in his eyes when he saw the two people standing outside the door. He hesitated for a moment, but still walked over and invited them in. When second Uncle Goose saw Yuba being dried in the courtyard, he asked curiously, "Chungrui, what are you doing?" "Bean products." Gu Chungrui did not reply after that as he led them into the house. Zhou, who was eating dumplings, was shocked when she saw them come in. She really didn't expect them to come to her house shamelessly, but she still got up and brought them 2 stools. "Father, second uncle, I have some dumplings. I'll make a bowl for each of you." After saying that, she turned around and walked out. "Father, second uncle, have a cup of water." Gu Chungrui poured a glass of water for each of them. "You guys seem to be living quite a good life now," second Uncle Gu said as he looked at the white dumplings on the table. "I was just lucky," Gu Chungrui said as he sat in the center seat. When Father Gu heard him say this, he knew that Gu Chungrui still held a grudge against him for the separation of the family. He immediately turned around and wanted to leave. However, when he thought of all the looks of disdain and ridicule he had received during this period of time, as well as his family's situation, he finally decided to stay. However, his expression was not good. Seeing this, Gu Chungrui did not provoke him anymore. Instead, he asked, "Did you come here today for the beet sprouts? Come and read on our website Wuxiao World site." "Thanks, that's right. I'm not afraid of you laughing at us, but we haven't found a job yet. You know the situation at home. There are a few mouths waiting for food. We can't just sit there and do nothing." Second Uncle Goose said, "Did you know that Mrs. Liu and second aunt blocked me at the village entrance? We only learned about it when we were having dinner, and I understand they are in the wrong. How could they spread this news? They're diluting our source of income." Gu Chungrui nodded and looked at him, waiting for the verdict. Second Uncle Gu was at a loss for words and had no idea what to say. He could only look at Father Gu. Father Gu only looked at Gu Chungrui and did not say anything. The two of them looked at each other for a while, but neither had the slightest intention of backing down. "How about we get your mother and second aunt to come and apologize to you later?" Second Uncle Gu spoke up right away. "Mrs. Liu," Gu Chungrui corrected. Second Uncle Gu was stunned for a while before he understood what Gu Chungrui meant. Gu Chungrui did not acknowledge Mrs. Liu's position as the first wife. Then, he looked at Father Gu with a weird expression. Seeing this, Father Gu clenched his fists, got up, and walked out. "No, big brother, you." Second Uncle Gu immediately chased after him, and the two avoided Zhuang. At that time, Zhou, hiding in the kitchen, saw they had left and immediately returned to the living room. She saw Gu Chungrui eating dumplings with his chopsticks and smiled. While eating the dumplings, she sat down and asked, "Rui, what did they say?" Second uncle meant to have Mrs. Liu and second aunt apologize. In the end, because I didn't acknowledge Mrs. Liu's identity as my stepmother, the two of them left in anger. No way. When did they become so submissive? It's not that they are submissive. It's just that the old man is too prideful. It's already his limit to lower his pride and come. It'll be interesting to see if he can hold back now that he's being made fun of in front of second uncle. Chapter 68 Purpose Zhou nodded thoughtfully, then said, "Then we'll wait for Mrs. Liu's apology? With Mrs. Liu's character, I doubt she will. Moreover, the old man wouldn't let her come over to apologize to a youngling like me." Gu Chungrui paused for a moment and said, "Babe, if they dare to make things difficult for you, don't be soft-hearted, or there will be endless trouble in the future. Don't worry, just based on the fact that they owe me 2 lives, I won't be soft-hearted toward them. That's good. Don't fight with force. If there's anything, let's discuss it. All right, hurry up and eat. Otherwise, these dumplings will turn into a lump." After Zhou finished speaking, she continued eating the dumplings. On the other hand, the 2 Gu brothers went out one after another. Second Uncle Gu still wanted to persuade his brother, but Father Gu did not give him a chance. He just rushed home in a rage. Third brother, what's wrong with you two? Are you two fighting? The patriarch, who was walking towards them, asked. The village chief, following behind him, chimed in. That's right. Let's talk it out. We're all family, and no obstacle can't be overcome. Sai, don't mention it. We went to Shengrua's place just now. Second Uncle Gu explained. But before he could finish his words, Father Gu interrupted him. Stop talking, aren't you ashamed? After he said that, he greeted the patriarch and the village chief before rushing home. Second Uncle Gu helplessly shook his head at the two of them and followed Father Gu. After they had walked far away, the village chief looked at the patriarch and asked, Qingji, do they have the same goal as us? It should be, but it looks like he struck a nail. The patriarch replied thoughtfully. Otherwise, seventh brother would not have looked like he wanted to say something but hesitated. Then, let's go take a look first. There are conflicts between them, and some things are easier for us to discuss. But of course, we wouldn't let the young couple take the short end of the stick. That's for sure. It's not easy for them either. After that, they walked toward Gu Shengrua's house. When they reached the entrance, they shouted and avoided Erzhuang as they entered the house. Gu Chengrue happened to meet the two at the door. The village chief pointed at the yuba and asked, Chengrue, what are you guys making? The yellow ones look pretty good. It's a bean product that Ing made. It's cold outside, Uncle and Grandpa Village Chief. You should come inside. Gu Chengrue let them into the house. The village head looked at the yuba thoughtfully. If the couple had a new source of income, it would be easier for them to ask for the bean sprouts. When Zhouing saw them coming in, she naturally knew their purpose. She greeted them and went to the kitchen with their bowls and chopsticks. After washing up, she made a pot of chrysanthemum rock candy tea for them. It just so happened that they were almost done with the small talk, so the patriarch asked, I think you and your wife more or less know the purpose of our visit today. I guess. It's about the bean sprouts, right? Gu Chengrue nodded. Yes, that's why we're here with our thick skin to ask for your opinion. The patriarch nodded. But it's not something forced. The village chief added. As you know, even though our village is better off than the other villages, that's when it's considered as a whole. Nearly half of the families here are still living a bitter life, so it's best to teach them. Of course, even if you did teach them, I wouldn't let you do so for free. You can state any conditions you want. If they accept, then go ahead. If they don't, then it's their own business. Chapter 69 Condition. As soon as the village chief finished speaking, the donkey outside brayed. Gu Chengrue and Zhouing looked at each other, and Gu Chengrue said, Since they've come to you to ask for a favor, I'm sure they really need a job. We can't just stand by and do nothing. We must say this in advance. We will only teach them. The way they sell, the price drops, and the amount they earn has nothing to do with us. Don't look for us if there's any trouble. That's for sure. That's their own business. The village chief said, surprised. What do you want in return? He asked. How about this? Whoever learns it has to send a strong laborer who can come here and help build a shed for the donkey in the backyard for 2 days. Or providing some clay and wood will do. Gu Chengrue replied. The patriarch and the village chief exchanged glances and immediately nodded. All right, it's settled then. We'll go and tell them. After a few polite words, they drank their cup of tea and left in a hurry. That night, the two elders sent a letter. Everyone who accepted their conditions could start work tomorrow. At the same time, Zhouing also promised them that she would teach the people who came how to grow bean sprouts. Of course, the Gu family's old mansion had also received the letter, which made Father Gu and Second Uncle Gu quite angry. If the entire village was learning to grow bean sprouts, how could they still make money? Thinking of this, Second Uncle Gu growled, What an ingrate! He would rather give the village away to make money than us. They've gone too far. No matter what, we're still a family. How can they help an outsider? Gu Qingye immediately echoed that indignantly when he heard that. I told you there. Just as Mrs. Liu opened her mouth, Father Gu glared at her and said, You shut up? No, brother. Just as Mrs. Yao was about to plead, Father Gu glared at her and said, You shut up too. This, Mrs. Yao still wanted to retort, but was directly pulled to the side by second Uncle Gu. Uncle, father, you can only blame Chungrui for this matter. How can you blame aunt and mother? Gu Chengji said indignantly as he supported Mrs. Yao, who had almost been pulled down. Brat, do we look like we can't tell right from wrong? Do you know what your mother and aunt did this morning? Second Uncle Gu slammed the table and said in a bad mood. What? After Gu Chengji heard this, he looked confused and then looked at Mrs. Yao. When Mrs. Liu and Mrs. Yao heard this, they immediately retreated to the side with guilty expressions. Suddenly, Mrs. Chiao said in a neutral tone, Chungrui planting bean sprouts were spread by the two at the village entrance. Otherwise, how would the village know about it? What they're doing is equivalent to cutting off Shengrui's source of income. Do you think that he will teach you now? But Chungrui shouldn't teach everyone else, Mrs. Yao said unhappily. If they want teach them, the entire village will be jealous and find trouble with them. Ultimately, it's all because of your stupid and terrible decisions. Mrs. Chiao rolled her eyes at her. It's time for you to face reality, she continued. This is Shangha village, not the capital. Without the royal merchant's title, and no one respecting you on behalf of the princess, no one will care about you. Indeed, it's already good enough that they didn't bully us. Second Uncle Gu paused for a moment before he continued. Actually, Chungrui didn't say that he wouldn't teach us. He just wants sister-in-law and your mother to apologize to her. An apology? Can he bear taking my apology? Isn't he afraid of shortening his lifespan? Mrs. Liu immediately shouted angrily. Chapter 70 Rare guest Father Gu sneered and immediately turned to leave. Gu Qingye saw that his father was about to give up and quickly chased after him. Father, why don't I apologize to Chungrui on behalf of my mother and second aunt? It's too late. Forget it. Father Gu shook his head and turned to walk into Mrs. Gu's room. Gu Qingye immediately reached out to stop him and said, Father, I don't think it's too late. The whole village is growing bean sprouts, so it might be an opportunity for us. An opportunity? Father Gu paused for a moment, but his eyes immediately lit up. You mean to sell the sprouts? Yes, think about it. If the villagers sell them alone, they won't find a good market. They can only peddle in towns or nearby villages because of the cold. They can't sell for any good price at all. But if we organize ourselves and use the oil mill ships and channels to ship it out, it'll be different. Although Father Gu disagreed with using the oil mill ships to sell goods, he had to admit it was a good idea. At that moment, he thought of someone he had once helped. It seemed that it was time for him to go over and take a look. Otherwise, it would be difficult for him to develop on this small piece of land with the Chow family suppressing him. Then you can make a trip there when you have the time, he said. But if it doesn't work out, don't make it too awkward. Gu Qingye's expression froze for a moment before he nodded and said, I know, Father. I'll go over now. After he finished speaking, he walked out. However, his face was getting darker and darker. He initially thought that after the failed attempt to wash away the bad luck and the separation of their family, his father would completely hate Chungrui. Now, it seemed things weren't too simple. Now that Shengrui's ability was revealed, his father clearly intended to reconcile. It seemed that he had to be more careful of Chungrui in the future. Father Gu did not care about his feelings. He was only thinking about how to restore the Gu family's past glory. As long as anyone was helpful to him, he would make use of them. On the other hand, Gu Chengye walked to Gu Shengrui's house. He paused for a moment before he walked over and knocked on the door. Hearing the dogs barking, Gu Chungrui, who had come out to welcome their guest, was stunned when he saw him. Chengye, what a rare guest. After saying that, he waved at Erzhuang and brought him into the house. When Gu Genji entered, he saw the patriarch and village chief sitting in front of the dining table, drinking tea and peeling peanuts. He was startled for a moment before addressing them. Uncle, Grandpa Village Chief, Chengye, you are here. Have a seat and try these 5-spice peanuts cooked by Miss Zhou. It's really fragrant. The patriarch smiled and waved at him. After that, he even moved his chair to make room for him. Thank you, Uncle. Gu Chengye thanked him as he took a stool and sat down. Chengye, drink some water. Gu Chungrui handed him a cup of chrysanthemum tea. This is a chrysanthemum? Gu Qingye took the teacup and asked in surprise when he saw a small chrysanthemum blooming in the water. Yes, wild chrysanthemums can dispel cold, clear heat, cleanse the liver, improve eyesight, and have detoxification and anti-inflammatory properties. It works exceptionally well in the case of dry mouth, heatiness, dry eyes, limb pain, and numbness caused by wind, cold, and moisture. Therefore, drinking a cup or two of them occasionally is good for your body. Gu Qingrui before sitting back down. I didn't think you would really learn some real skills from Dr. Sunday. It's easy to be influenced by what you see and hear all day, so I can't help but remember some of it. But fortunately, I was paying attention back then and can have a skill of my own to make a living. Gu Qingrui replied, I don't think it's just to make a living. Your skills are equal to the doctors in town. The patriarch said with a smile. Chapter 71 Everyone changes. Not only that, didn't the 13th son of our Qin family get rejected by the doctor in town? Chang Rui still saved him in the end. The village chief said, 2 elders, please stop with the praising. Let's see how it goes in the future. Gu Qingrui said with a smile. Yes, yes, we look forward to it. The patriarch agreed. He then looked at Gu Chengye and asked, By the way, Chengye, why did you come here today? Gu Qingye looked at Gu Qingrui hesitantly, but he could not say the words of apology he had prepared. Is it because of the bean sprout? The village chief asked. Yes and no, there are other things. Then you guys can chat. It's getting late, and we should go back. The patriarch looked at his stammering appearance and knew that it was something hard to say before them. He grabbed a handful of peanuts and immediately stood up. Right, you young people can chat. We'll be going back now. The village chief stood up and agreed. Seeing this, Gu Qingrui did not ask them to stay. After sending them to the gate, he turned around and returned to the house. After he sat down, he looked at Gu Chengye, who was drinking his tea, and said, Chengye, there's no one else here. If there's anything you need, just say it. Gu Qingye put down his cup and stood up. He bowed deeply and said, I'm here today to represent my mother and second aunt and apologize to you for what happened this morning. Seeing this, Gu Qingrui was shocked. At the same time, he admired Chengye for his personality. Chengye was able to be flexible with his standing. Based on this, he had to be more careful with him in the future. Chengye, please have a seat. To be honest, I'm really disappointed in mother and second aunt's actions. No matter what, I'm still my father's son, but they treat me less than an outsider. Don't you think that their ruckus has forced me against the rest of the village? I have no choice but to tell them how to produce bean sprouts. Gu Qingye's expression froze on his face because he could not refute what he had said. If it were him, he would not even let him in. Yes, I also know that they have indeed gone too far, so I hope you can forgive them on behalf of Father. I can't say that I've forgiven them. I just hope that they'll remember this in the future. I won't tolerate this forever. Gu Qingrui's face turned cold. If there's a next time, I won't let it go so easily. Don't tell me you want to. What if this happens to you? Chengye, do you still remember what kind of life we had at home? Do you still remember the circumstances under which we separated? If it were you, what would you do? Gu Chengye clenched his fists and mumbled, You've changed a lot. At a certain point, people will change. Didn't Father change? Has your mother not changed? Even Chengxi isn't as lively as before and has become a hard-working and bitter person. Gu Qingye looked at him deeply after hearing that. He was shocked when he saw the tenacity, confidence, and faint deterrence in his eyes. At the same time, he quickly understood that Cheng Rui had grown up quickly into a man with a truly strong heart. He was no longer the pitiful, helpless wretch, nor was he the person they could bully whenever they wanted. When he thought of this, he panicked slightly. It seemed that his third brother was going to break away from their control completely. Chapter 72 Recipe in exchange for roast chicken. After a few polite words, Gu Qingye left. Gu Qingrui sent him to the door and said, If you want to learn how to grow bean sprouts, let Qingxi do it. It's straightforward. See you. Gu Qingye was stunned for a moment before he nodded and turned around to leave. After Gu Qingrui sent him off, he went to the kitchen and started to work with Zhouing. On the other hand, Gu Qingye returned home and saw that the lights in his room were still on. He paused for a moment, turned around, pushed the door open, and walked in. Seeing Father Gu sitting before the candlelight reading a book, he remembered what Gu Chungrui had said before and sized him up thoughtfully. Ignoring his other aspects, even just his appearance had changed. His father had aged more than 10 years, and his face had become much thinner. After sensing his gaze, Father Gu raised his head and saw him staring at him for a while. He couldn't help but ask, "What are you looking at?" "It's nothing. I just found that Father's sideburns are full of white hair," Gu Qingye said as he sat down. "I'm old. No matter what, I'm already in my 40s. Since I've stopped taking all sorts of supplements, it's normal that I'll look my age." "How did your discussion go?" Father Gu asked. Gu Qingye shook his head and briefly told him about their conversation. "Father, he has completely changed." After hearing this, Father Gu pondered for a moment. He looked up at the window with empty eyes and said, "He's right. We've all changed. It's just that some of us have become stronger, some of us have become weaker, and most of us are still living in dreams." Gu Qingye looked at him in shock after hearing that. All kinds of emotions surged through him, making him feel like crying, especially when he thought about working in the workshop, suffering from pain he had never experienced. His back would always be sore, but in order to survive, he had to grit his teeth and persist. "Sleep early and take it slow. You'll find your way out." After Father Gu sensed that Chungye was not in a good mood, he patted him on the shoulder, got up, and walked out. After leaving the house, Father Gu turned around and looked for Gu Chengxi. Father Gu informed him that he would learn to grow bean sprouts the next day. Then, he told second Uncle Gu that he was going to the main hall to chat with their mother. As for what they talked about, no one knew. The next day, Mrs. Chiao personally watched as Mrs. Liu and Mrs. Yao worked, so they couldn't slack off. After Gu Chungrui delivered the goods to Hongyun Restaurant and received his pay, he found manager Liu and determined the amount of tofu skin and dried yuba needed. He told him that they were going to spread the recipe for growing bean sprouts. "Manager Liu, I estimate that in less than 10 days, there will definitely be a lot of people coming to the town to sell bean sprouts. I hope you can make preparations early. It doesn't matter since our bean sprout cooking recipe has been launched." Manager Liu hesitated and continued. "Since you plan to spread the method of growing bean sprouts, I wonder if you could let me know what you think of me distributing the cooking recipe to other branches. As for the price, you can decide." "Of course I can. As for the price, I heard that your restaurant's roast chicken is the best. Why don't you give one to me?" Manager Liu was stunned for a moment before he laughed out loud. "No matter what, I should at least give you 2. How about tomorrow? They'll save 2 for you tomorrow." "Then it's settled." Gu Chungrui nodded and told him seriously about the things to take note of when growing bean sprouts. "When you start growing your bean sprouts here, just let me know, and I will stop providing you with any more bean sprouts." After exchanging a few more polite words, he turned to leave Hongyun Restaurant. Then, he bought some mustard, sweet noodle sauce, and streaky pork before going home. When Gu Chungrui left town, the patriarch brought a bunch of people carrying mud bricks and wood over. Zhouing didn't expect Tian Jiawang to buy 6 huge wooden pillars over. Although they were rough and thin, they were more than enough to build a donkey shed. Chapter 73. Zhouing greeted the crowd. After choosing the spot for the shed, she left them to their things and returned to the front yard. After a short while, the women who wanted to learn to grow bean sprouts came over one after another. After everyone had arrived, Zhouing started her lesson. She told them the whole process of growing bean sprouts and the things to pay attention to. In the end, she even took them to the kitchen for a visit. The whole process took less than 15 minutes, and the women were in disbelief. "If I knew it was so simple, I wouldn't have come to learn," someone said regretfully. "I've just thrown in 100 clay bricks for nothing. No one forced you to come." Mrs. Bai turned her head and scolded the person. "Besides, everyone knows how to cook, but the same dish will taste different when cooked by different people. If you want to sell your food for money, you have to learn how to cook, don't you?" Indeed, no matter how easy it is to grow bean sprouts, we've lived half our lives without anyone discovering it. Sixth Aunt Gu agreed. "I think it's better to go home early and try to grow bean sprouts." Everyone immediately shut up when they heard that. Those who confirmed that they had remembered everything immediately went home to work. Those who weren't confident asked Zhouing a few more questions and only left after they remembered everything. When most of them had left, Gu Chengxi walked in with a half-carried basket of firewood and said, "Third sister-in-law, Uncle said that Cheng asked me to come and learn how to grow bean sprouts. Is that true?" "Of course, it's true. Follow me." Zhouing brought him to the kitchen and taught him about it. Just as she finished, Gu Chengruwei walked in with some things. He looked at Gu Chengxi and said, "Chengxi, you are here. Help your sister-in-law cook, and let's have lunch here." He handed 2 pounds of streaky pork and their sauces to Zhou Ying as he said that. Gu Chengxi's eyes lit up when he saw the food. "Third sister-in-law, are you planning to eat zhajiamian for lunch?" "Yeah, zhajiamian is simple to cook, and everyone loves it." "Sure, they'll help you start the fire. Then you guys go ahead. I'm going to the back," Gu Chengxi said as he led the donkey cart to the backyard. Meanwhile, Zhou Ying and Gu Chengxi cooked in the kitchen. When they were almost done, Zhou Ying asked, "Have you been eating well at home recently?" "Still the same, but I occasionally find some wild game on the mountain to eat. Plus, you guys give me some snacks sometimes, so it's okay." "I see. Growing bean sprouts is an opportunity, so you better seize it." Gu Chengxi paused before he smiled and nodded. "Thank you, third sister-in-law. I understand." In the blink of an eye, 2 days had passed. Not only had the patriarch helped to build a spacious donkey shed, but he had also helped to build a chicken pen. When they were finally done, Zhou Ying brought 2 pounds of tofu for each of them to express her gratitude. Following that, the village was quite harmonious. On the 7th day, Sister Tian was the first to grow her batch of bean sprouts. Following that, everyone succeeded one after another, and there were more people selling bean sprouts everywhere. Therefore, in less than 2 days, many people suffered a blow due to the oversupply. In the end, Father Gu and second Uncle Gu bought over their bean sprouts at the price of 2 coppers and then sold them to the neighboring county by boat. Their business was going well. However, Tian Zhaowang didn't sell his bean sprouts to them. Instead, he pushed his cart to town and the villages to sell them, having quite a good business. That afternoon, Zhou Ying collected the dried yuba when Tian Zhaowang passed by. He saw and greeted her. "You sure are busy." "That's right, Brother Tian. You've sold them out so quickly?" Zhou Ying turned her head and asked. "I supplied some to a small tavern, so it was a quick day." Tian Zhaowang paused for a moment and pushed his cart into her garden. "Sister, do you still make the braised dried tofu you made before?" Chapter 74. Jealous Why? Zhou Ying was stunned and asked, "Brother Tian, do you want to buy them?" "Yes, I'm out every day anyway, and it's too bland for me just to sell bean sprouts, so I wanted to sell them together. By the way, if you have extra tofu, you can also share a plate with me to try to sell it." Zhou Ying replied, "If that's the case, they'll give you 10 pounds of tofu and 5 pounds of dried tofu to try. If it sells well, we'll increase the quantity." "Thank you so much, sister." Tian Zhaowang nodded and asked, "I wonder about the price?" "We'll see how it goes tomorrow. Don't worry, I won't cheat you." "All right, I'll leave you to your work," Tian Zhaowang said as he pushed the cart and walked out. After Zhou Ying finished her work, she quickly picked up 10 pounds of soybeans and soaked them. After that, she used a pressure cooker to make a pot of beef soup. She planned to eat them with noodles when Gu Chengruwei returned. What she didn't expect was to wait until midnight. She had fallen asleep on the bed until Zhuang's cries woke her up. After suddenly waking up, she was confused for a moment before she came to her senses. She stood and walked out. Seeing it was Gu Chengruwei, she heaved a sigh of relief and asked, "Why did you come back so late today?" "I was in the neighboring village. I met a pregnant woman who was having a difficult labor, so I came back late." Gu Chengruwei strode in after explaining. "You delivered a baby?" Zhou Ying asked with a worried look. This wasn't the modern world. If he, as a man, delivered a baby, his reputation might be ruined. "No, I just prescribed some medicine to induce labor and guided the midwife to give birth." Gu Chengruwei pinched her nose and said, "Don't worry, I know what the situation here is like. I want help deliver a baby unless I have no other choice." Zhou Ying was relieved and said, "That's good. Go wash your hands first. We'll go make some noodles, and we'll have ramen tonight." Give me 2 more pieces of meat. I'm really hungry today, Gu Chungrui quickly said. All right, Zhouing replied and went directly to the kitchen. She stoked the fireplace and closed it up. Then, she went into her inner space and cooked 2 big bowls of ramen. She picked out the beef and put it into one big bowl, then brought the bowls out. After a warm meal, Gu Chungrui took a money bag from his medicine box and handed it to her. By the way, this is the silver we earned today, a total of 3 taels and 2 coins. The 2 taels of silver were given by 13th uncle when I did a follow-up examination. You didn't ask for money back then, right? Yes, I didn't. The medicine that came later was also something they bought from town. They felt embarrassed for me treating him for free, so they gave me 2 taels of silver. I saw they were sincere in giving it to me, so I accepted it. Zhouing nodded and left him 2 copper coins, putting the rest into her inner space. Let's sleep in your inner space tonight. I need to make a box of acne cream with aloe vera for a patient. Gu Chungrui said. Female? Yes, it's a little girl. Make me a box of moisturizer then, but I have to feed Erzhuang first. After Zhouing finished speaking sourly, she put the rest of the bones into the bowl. She scooped a big bowl of hot soup and threw 2 black steamed buns into it, giving them to Erzhuang. After that, the couple took the dirty bowls into the inner space and continued their business. The following day, when the 2 came out early to grind soybeans, Zhouing remembered that she had promised to provide some tofu and dried tofu for Tianjiaowang. She hurriedly told Gu Chungrui about this. Gu Chungrui hesitated momentarily and said, Just do as you see fit, but don't tire yourself out. Chapter 75 Taking Orders. Yes, I know, Zhouing promised, and she started to get busy. However, Zhouing didn't expect that before noon. Tianjiaowang came with a cart and asked, Sister, do you still have any more dried tofu and tofu? Especially the dried tofu. I delivered all the ones you gave me to the tavern, and I don't have any more to sell. Zhouing replied, I really don't have any more. You can only wait until tomorrow. Then can I order 1 huge plate of tofu and 50 pounds of dried tofu for tomorrow? So many? Zhouing asked in surprise. Then, she thought of the various things stored in her inner space and asked, Brother Tian, what is the size of the tavern you were talking about? It's a small tavern on the dock, specially opened for the hard laborers, so they can't afford anything expensive. This dried tofu is a delicious side dish with a little mix, so the boss wants to order more. Okay, Zhouing said, we'll give you a new dish tomorrow to try selling it at the tavern. See if the others want it. What dish? It's a secret for now. All right, they'll come over tomorrow morning. Tianjiaowang turned around and left. After he left, Zhouing soaked another 20 pounds of soybeans and prepared a set of pig heads and pig intestines. After cleaning them up quickly, she put them into her inner space to stew. In the evening, she went into her inner space on time and took the pork out of the stew, completing her braised pork intestine dish. At night, Gu Shengrui's eyes lit up when he saw the braised pork intestine. Babe, I thought you never ate intestines. Why did you make these braised pork intestines today? Because you like to eat it? I've made it just in time to satisfy your craving. Zhouing said as she told him about her plan to sell the intestines while serving him some rice. It's good, but you'll be too tired. It's nothing. I have nothing to do anyway. You can go out and chat around. It's not good to be cooped up at home all the time, right? Let's talk about it after the new year. Everyone is busy growing bean sprouts. Who has the time to chat? That's true. There are fewer people out and about in the village now. Gu Chungrui saw that she was insistent and did not try to persuade her anymore, so he decided not to make house visits for his patient again. He would wait for his patients to come to him and stay at home to help her with her business if there weren't any. Unexpectedly, Gu Chungrui again received a large order from manager Lu the next day. He asked the couple to provide them with as many dried yuba as possible, and they would take them all. Therefore, after returning home, Gu Chungrui stayed at home. He helped Zhouing dry the yuba, filling up the kitchen, living room, and courtyard. In the afternoon, Tianjiaowang ordered a serving of braised pork intestines. Seeing this, Zhouing felt it was impossible to stew them in her inner space. The 2 simply used the mud bricks left from the donkey shed to make 2 small stoves in the kitchen, bought 2 big pots, and ordered a few tofu molds. After that, She hired Dehua to help keep the kitchen fire going at the price of 100 coppers a month with lunch provided. She even told others that she would be buying more soybeans and firewood. It wasn't until 5 days later that the two of them started to get busy openly. Elder Qiao had just returned from purchasing the Gu family's business on this day. When he heard that the restaurant's business had taken a dive, he immediately looked for the manager of Dongxing Restaurant, Wang Quan. He asked, "Mr. Wang, I heard that the restaurant's business hasn't been good recently. What's going on?" "Sir, there are two main reasons. Over the past month, Hongyun Restaurant has been releasing new dishes one after another, snatching away many of our high-end customers. There's also a small tavern on the dock that has introduced a lot of new dishes. More than half of the customers in the middle and lower end have left too." So, Wang Quan replied in a trembling voice. Chapter 76. A young girl in love. Elder Qiao stood up angrily and threw the teacup at him. "You useless bastard. We can't touch Hongyun Restaurant because they have a strong backing. But can't you deal with that small tavern? What are you doing?" Wang Quan was so scared that he trembled and wanted to hide but didn't dare to. Fortunately, the teacup fell short of his feet. After that, he took 2 steps back and knelt down. "Master, please calm down. The people in the tavern aren't the problem. It's the person who supplied them that ruined our business. So I've been investigating that person for the past 2 days." "Oh, did you find out?" Elder Qiao finally heaved a sigh of relief. "I did, but they're also supplying Hongyun Restaurant, so, it seems that they're quite capable. Get up and tell me in detail."
Yes.
After Wang Quan got up, he silently wiped his sweat. Then, he talked about Zhou Ying and her husband's business and mentioned that Father Gu and second Uncle Gu were reselling bean sprouts in the neighboring county. "What? Have the Gu brothers found a job? What are you guys doing?" Elder Qiao slammed his fist on the table and roared. I found it when I was investigating the couple. It hasn't been dealt with yet." "How long have they been doing this?" "About half a month." "Xiao Mu, come in." Hearing this, Elder Qiao turned his head and shouted outside. The Qiao estate's housekeeper, Xiao Mu, standing guard outside the door, felt his heart skip a beat when he heard Elder Qiao's furious roar. However, he still quickly walked in and greeted him. "Master, do you have any orders?" "Orders? How would I dare to order you? You're so busy that you've forgotten the most important thing I tasked you with, right?" I don't dare. All right, let me ask you. Do you know that the Gu brothers have found a job?" Xiao Mu was at a loss when he heard this, and his heart skipped a beat. He thought that he was done for this time due to his negligence. Then, he bowed and said, "Please forgive me, Master. I have been checking the autumn accounts recently, so I didn't notice what happened to the Gu brothers. But, of course, it was my negligence." "You're making excuses. I think you just don't care." Yes, your humble servant. Stop it. Ask Mr. Wang to tell you about the Gu brothers and quickly settle this matter." Elder Qiao said to Wang Quan at this point, "By the way, send someone to give me a taste of the new dishes at Hongyun Restaurant and that small tavern. You should also devise a new recipe as soon as possible and try to turn the situation around." "Yes, master. I'll do it now." Wang Quan turned around and left after he finished speaking. When Xiaomu saw this, he bowed to Elder Qiao and withdrew. Then, he found Wang Quan to understand the Gu brothers' matter. He turned around, called 2 people over, and instructed them on something. At the same time, Zhou Ying and her husband were busy making yuba. Then, suddenly, they heard Erzhuang's barking. Gu Chengrui immediately stopped what he was doing and walked out. Seeing someone with a servant standing at the door, shocked by Erzhuang, he was stunned for a moment. Then, he walked out and said to the veiled girl, "Miss Liu, you've used up the ointment?" "Not yet. Dr. Gu, aren't you going to invite me in for a seat?" Miss Liu bowed and said. At the same time, she looked at him with a pair of wandering eyes, shyly and timidly, like a young girl in love. Gu Shengru's scalp went numb, so he directly refused. "Miss Liu, it's a bit inconvenient inside. If you have anything to say, you can say it here." Chapter 77. A warning, Dr. Gu. Miss Lu looked at him with a sad expression and tears in her eyes. Gu Chungrui did not give her another chance to show her charm and rejected her again. Since Miss Lu isn't here for a consultation, please leave. After that, he turned around and went home. Seeing this, Miss Lu wanted to stop him, but Zhuang once again bared his teeth and barked at her. Seeing this, the maidservant at the side said, "Young miss, in this servant's opinion, we should leave. We can send Dr. Gu for a follow-up examination when the ointment is gone. Otherwise, it would be troublesome if the villagers recognized us." Miss Lu looked around and saw many children and women staring at them curiously. Then, she looked at Zhuang, who was still trying to rush at her, and a malicious look flashed in her eyes. She looked like a completely different person from her weakling self just now. But in the end, she nodded, turned around, and left in her carriage. After they left the village, Miss Lu looked at the maidservant and said, "Chuier, go back and find someone to poison that vicious dog of theirs to death." "Yes, miss." Chuier nodded. She was obviously used to this. After that, she hesitated before saying, "Young miss, how should we deal with that Lady Gu? She is the wife of Dr. Gu. Furthermore, she is the daughter of the imperial physician Zhou. I'm afraid she is not easy to deal with." "What's there to be afraid of? Hasn't my father always been suppressing the Gu family? When the time is right, he'll give the Gu family a way out. By then, there'll be plenty of people who can help me." "I understand, miss, as expected of your smarts." After Chuier finished speaking, she obediently poured Miss Lu a glass of water. When they arrived in town, they took a detour and entered the back door of the Chao family's residence. Gu Chungrui did not know about Miss Liu's scheme, but he would not take it to heart even if he did. He did not want to cause trouble all this time because they just wanted to live a simple and warm life. However, he would not let it be if trouble came knocking on his door. Therefore, when he returned to the kitchen, he smiled at Zhou, who was still busy. Then, he turned around to get busy as well. 2 days later, Tian Jiawang came to pick up the goods. After that, he pulled Gu Chungrui aside and said, "Brother Gu, you guys should be more careful these days." "Brother Tian, did you hear something?" Gu Chungrui paused, turned his head and asked. "I can't say for sure, but someone asked for the recipe for the braised intestines, and I also saw strangers wandering around the village these 2 days. I can't guarantee anything, but I just feel uneasy." "Who is it? When did he ask you for the recipe for the braised intestines?" "When I started delivering the braised pork intestines, the tavern owner asked. But after I said it was troublesome, he didn't ask again. Yesterday, I heard from the tavern owner that someone had been asking about the recipe for the past 2 days, and they've been going there to buy the pork intestines for the past 2 days. Every time they go, they'll buy everything." "I understand. Thank you for telling me this, Brother Tian. You should take care of yourself too." "I will. Sorry to bother you." Tian Jiawang said his goodbyes and pushed the small cart away. Gu Chungrui stood in place and pondered for a moment. Those interested in the recipe for braised intestines were most likely in the food business. It was more likely to be the restaurants in town. Of course, the possibility of it being Hongyun restaurant wasn't high, as they could have just looked for them directly. Who would it be? His heart stopped as he remembered that the Chao family also had a restaurant. It seemed that he had to investigate it carefully, or he would be in a disadvantageous position. Afterwards, he returned to the kitchen to load the goods he had prepared for Hongyun restaurant and drove the donkey cart back to town. Chapter 78. Poisoning. Zhou didn't know about this. After Gu Chungrui left, she continued to dry the yuba as usual. However, when she was moving the drying frame into the yard today, she found a giant dead rat at the foot of the wall. She was disgusted and put the yuba aside to find a shovel to throw it away. When she walked to the shed, she found a white bun on the ground. It was stuffed with meat. Seeing this, Zhou had a bad feeling in her heart. Because she never made pure meat buns, this must have been from someone else. Looking at the position, it was obvious that it was aimed at Zhuang. However, Zhuang was a dog. So who did he get in the way of that the person had to kill a dog? Was it a thief? However, she quickly recalled that dogs had a sharp nose and that Gu Chungrui had trained it to sniff common poison just in case. Hence, she directly kicked the steamed bun to Zhuang's hut and shouted, Zhuang, sniff. Sleeping with his eyes closed, Zhuang woke up immediately when he heard her call. He looked at the bun before him and kicked it away without even sniffing. Then, he wagged his tail and squatted in front of her, looking like he was waiting for her to praise him. Seeing this, Zhouing rubbed his head, then took a fresh chicken from her interspace and gave it to him. Then, she threw the steamed buns into a corner. Finally, she threw the rat away using a shovel and returned to work. After Gu Chungrui had delivered the goods and left Hongyun restaurant, he had not walked far when he met the tiger and leopard brothers, each holding a chicken leg and gnawing on it. After gnawing on it, they were still unsatisfied and even licked the oil off their hands. In his eyes, a light flashed. Then, he cracked his whip and drove the donkey cart over. "My two brothers, you're going home? It's been a long time since I've seen you." When the two of them heard his familiar voice, they immediately froze. Then, they turned their heads and laughed dryly. "Oh, it's Dr. Gu." "You." When Gu Erjiang said this, he looked at the unfamiliar donkey cart and asked, "This cart is yours?" "Yeah, I just bought it a few days ago. Come on up if you're heading back too." "Ah, don't mind if we do." After Gu Erjiang finished speaking, he immediately laughed and climbed into the cart. Qin Zhuang pouted when he saw this, but still followed. After they left the town, Gu Chungrui asked again, "My two brothers, what have you been busy with recently?" "Nothing much. I just stayed at home to recuperate for a few days and went to town to do my old profession. Today is the day I get paid, so I plan to return home to visit." "Your old profession?" It's to help the gambling den urge others to pay their debts." Gu Erjiang replied with an awkward smile. This was their main job, and they would do some sneaky things when they were free. But, of course, they would never say these things out loud. "I see. However, this job is not only dangerous, but it is also not a long-term solution. Have the two of you ever thought of finding a proper job?" "Dr. Gu, please don't mock us brothers. Who would want to hire us?" "That will depend on whether you have the determination to start over." "Of course there is. No one wants to be chased around and berated every day." "That's good. Why don't you two follow me?" Gu Chungrui turned his head and asked, "Dr. Gu, please don't tease us. We can't help you with anything." "Why would I tease you guys? I'm serious." After hearing this, Gu Erjiang and Qin Zhuang looked at each other and saw the disbelief in each other's eyes. However, the two of them quickly shook their heads. They hadn't forgotten how he had quickly dealt with the two of them last time. If they worked under him, they would be tightly restrained by him. Chapter 79 Recruitment. When Gu Chungrui saw the resistance on their faces and the fear in their eyes, he quickly understood. They were afraid of him after he beat them up on the mountain. It seems that playing with them in the dark was worth it back then. "Why don't you even have the heart to correct yourself?" he said with a look of disdain. "Or do you want to live like this for the rest of your life? Not only would you not be able to experience the warmth of having a wife and child, when you are old, you won't even have anyone to serve you tea. After you die, you will be wrapped in a straw mat and buried in a pit. There wouldn't even be anyone to burn you money. Or maybe even worse, there won't even be a corpse of you to collect. You will leave yourself to be fed to the crows and dogs, unable to leave behind an intact corpse." At that moment, the faint cry of a crow could be heard, causing the two of them to shiver in fear. They didn't care if they had a wife or children, or not, since they couldn't afford to raise them anyway. However, they couldn't stand it when they thought about how their corpses would be exposed in the wilderness and how they would end up being eaten. Then, the two of them looked at each other again and asked in unison, "Dr. Gu, are you really willing to give us a job? Do you think I'm free to talk so much nonsense with you? Then, I wonder, what do you want us to do?" Qin Zhuang asked. Gu Erjiang quickly followed and nodded. "You guys should know that I'm also making tofu and dried yuba in addition to practicing medicine. Your work is also simple. When I deliver my goods daily, you will drive the donkey cart to help pick out and collect the soybeans. You should be able to do this, right?" "Yes, definitely. But the salary?" 10 coppers a day. They'll increase it when you do a good job. Just tell me if you're doing it or not." "Let's do it. Let's do it. We brothers will do it." "Dr. Gu, aren't you afraid we'll drive the donkey cart out and leave?" Gu Jiang asked at this time. Unless you want to wander around for your entire life. Besides, you all have your own homes. Although they're a little run down, they're still worth more than a donkey. Don't worry, Dr. Gu. The two men promised immediately. We'll do our best. By the way, when do we start? Qian Zhuang asked again. In 5 days. In the next few days, help me keep an eye on the strangers who come to the village and see who they are. Also, find out who's asking about the recipe for braised pork intestine in town. Remember, just find out who it is. You don't have to take the risk. By the way, I'll pay you your salary for the next 5 days. There's such a good thing. Hearing this, Gu Jiang was immediately happy. It was their strength to get information through the grapevine. Dr. Gu, do you mean that there have been strangers in the village these 2 days and have been looking for trouble with you? Qian Zhuang asked. I'm not sure, but it's better to be safe than sorry. Do you guys dare to do it? Let's do it. All right, they'll leave this matter to you. Take this money and get a pot of alcohol. Consider it my treat. Gu Chengrui gave them some money after he finished speaking. Dr. Gu, you're sure generous. Since you think so highly of us, we'll follow you. Qian Zhuang said as he took the money. When they arrived at the village, the three of them parted ways. However, Qian Zhuang met a stranger not far away. He immediately followed him quietly, thinking of the salary he had just received. After Gu Chengrui returned home and tied up the donkey, Zhouing told him that someone had tried to poison their dog. Gu Shengrui's expression changed. Where's the bun? He asked. Let me see. It's in this corner of the shed, Zhouing pointed out, pointing to the corner closest to the house. Gu Chengrui immediately walked over. Chapter 80. Something happened. Seeing the remaining half of the bun, Gu Shengrui's eyes immediately narrowed, because he could tell that this kind of steamed bun with lots of ingredients was definitely not bought. The main issue was that there weren't many houses in the village that made this kind of bun, and it was impossible for them to use it to harm a dog. This meant it was most likely done by an outsider with decent family wealth. After that, he took out a piece of paper from his pocket and scooped out a small part of the meat filling. When he returned, he said in a low voice, Babe, I'm going to go into the inner space to do some tests to see what kind of poison was used. Look after the Dehua. Follow me. After Zhouing finished speaking, she returned to the living room and sent him into her inner space. When she came out, she had a small bottle of pepper spray in her hand. Then, she put it in her apron and went back to the kitchen to get busy. It wasn't until lunch was ready that Zhouing let Dehua eat first. She entered the west room and closed the door before entering the villa's second floor in her inner space. Seeing Gu Chengrui still busy in the laboratory, Zhouing walked over and asked, Is the result not out yet? Your meal is ready. You guys eat first. Pick me up in half an hour. Gu Chengrui said without turning his head. Seeing this, Zhouing retreated. After keeping a portion of his food, she started lunch with Dehua. After lunch, the sky turned dark and a northwest wind blew. Obviously, the yuba couldn't be dried anymore. Zhouing gave Dehua a large bowl of tofu pudding and asked her to go home and rest. She brought food into her interspace. Gu Chengrui had just finished his work, so she heated it in the microwave and passed it to him. After he finished eating, Zhouing asked, Rui, do you know what poison it is? It's arsenic. It's not difficult to determine that. However, I used traditional medicine to make some disinfectants and anesthetics to replace iodophor and our modern anesthetics. Otherwise, the stock in your interspace wouldn't last long. Oh right, I've also made some high-concentrate knockout powder for self-defense. Just in case, I'll bring a bag with me when I go out in the future. Then who do you think is trying to harm Erzhuang? I don't think it's an ordinary thief. Zhouing asked thoughtfully. It's hard to say. Gu Chengrui shook his head. He hesitated but still told her what Tian Zhaowang had told him. He then told her about how he had hired the tiger and leopard brothers. If it's really the Chow family, we have to be careful. They're not merely after us for the recipe. I will. By the way, it's getting cloudy outside. Let's hurry up and clean up the house. After saying that, she took him out of her inner space. They didn't expect that it was already drizzling outside. The two immediately took the yuba from the yard into the house. After that, Gu Chengrui fed the donkey and returned. The The two of them went into the kitchen and made the remaining soy milk into dried tofu and braised 2 sets of pig intestines. After the two finished their work, they took out a bag of coal from the inner space and added it to the stove. Then, they sealed the fireplace and returned to the living room. They cooked dinner in the inner space that night. After dinner, the two drank a pot of tea, and each took out a book to read. Of course, Gu Chungrui was reading medical books, while Zhouing was reading cooking books. Just as the two added more fire and were about to enter the inner space, Zhuang suddenly barked out, followed by a knock on the door. The two listened to the heavy and urgent knocking on the door. After looking at each other, Zhouing immediately put away the table lamp, books, tea set, and other things that should not appear in the room into her inner space. Gu Chungrui put on his coat and walked out while shouting, "Who is it? What's the matter?" "Chungrui, it's your second brother. Father and second uncle are seriously injured. Hurry and bring the medicine to the house. I have to go back first." Gu Qingye ran back in a hurry after he finished speaking. Chapter 81. Rescue. Gu Chungrui was stunned after hearing this. He cursed inwardly as he remembered the strangeness in the village these 2 days. Not only were they being watched, but they also discovered their old family was selling bean sprouts, and the person had taken action. Thinking of this, he immediately turned around and returned to the house. He said to Zhouing, "Babe, something happened over there, and I have to go over. Do you want to come with me, or wait at home? Let's go together. If I don't go, who knows what rumors they'll spread." Zhouing also began to put on her clothes. After that, the couple hurriedly packed up the first aid kit, locked the door, and walked to their old house together in the drizzling rain. When they arrived, they found the old house was in a mess. Some were wailing, and some were carrying buckets of water back and forth. However, all that came out of the main house was blood. When Gu Changye saw Gu Chungrui enter, he immediately brought him into the main house and said, "Chungrui, hurry up and look at father and second uncle. You have to save them." After entering the room, Gu Chungrui was shocked to see the two lying on a large bed. It was obvious that they had been soaked, and their faces were as pale as paper. Under the light, a faint gray hue was on their faces, making them look like dead people. Then, he quickly went over to listen to their heartbeats. After confirming that the two of them were still alive, he said to Gu Changye and Gu Chengji, squatting at the side and starting a fire, "Big brother, don't start a fire. You and Chengye should wash your hands and help me deal with their wounds." After he finished, he looked at Mrs. Chiao, who was sitting on the chair nervously, and said, "Grandmother, take all the women out first. Remember to prepare a set of clean clothes and bedding for father and second uncle. Sai, I'll leave this place to you. If you need anything, just let me know." After Mrs. Chiao finished speaking, she sat up and then walked out with the help of Mrs. Huang. When Mrs. Liu and Mrs. Yao saw this, they did not want to go out but knew that now was not the time to make a fuss and followed quietly. After coming out, everyone saw Zhou Ying's rosy and chubbier face, but they only glanced at her and didn't have the mood to find fault with her. Seeing this, Zhouing naturally did not look for trouble. She turned around and pulled Gu Chengxi into the kitchen to help boil some water and stoke the fire. At the same time, Zhouing asked, "Chengxi, do you know what happened? How did they get so badly injured? I heard that the cargo ship encountered water bandits on the way. Not only had they robbed father's money, but they also sank the boat. So, not only did we lose all the money we earned recently, but I also heard that they had to pay for the medical expenses of the crew and reimburse the boat. More importantly, 2 people died." I'm afraid that Gu Chenxi's face fell as he said this. "Someone died? How many people are there on the ship?" "I heard that there are 8 of them. Besides uncle and my father, there are 6 other crew members. Are they all from the clan?" "No, there are some from other villages." After Zhouing heard this, she knew that the Gu family was in big trouble this time. It was likely that the family coffers would be emptied, and she had a headache just thinking about it. After that, she didn't ask any more questions. Instead, she asked about his recent lifestyle and was relieved to know that he was doing well. About 2 hours later, the light rain turned into light snow. Gu Chungrui and his 2 brothers had worked together to treat the wounds of the 2 elderly. After they were finally carried back to their rooms, Gu Chungrui said, Remember not to start a fire in the house. Instead, use the method of rubbing the palms of your hands and feet to let them slowly warm up. For the next 7 days, they must eat light food, or else it will be troublesome if their wound festers. Father is already injured to this extent. You can't possibly still want to go back, right? Gu Chengye turned his head and asked. Chapter 82 blocked. I want, but I must go back and get more medicine now. Someone has to go to town tomorrow to buy some warm and nourishing herbs for me to make a medicinal meal, so I guess I have to trouble Cheng. Gu Chengrui said with a slight glance. Why don't I write a list? He said. Chengye, you can go to town to buy medicine tomorrow. Gu Chengye looked a little embarrassed when he heard that. Then, he quickly shook his head and said, You know medicine better, so you should go. Then he'll have to trouble you to help father rub his hands and feet. After Gu Chengrui finished speaking, he went to a second room to give Gu Chengji some instructions. Then, he brought Zhouing home and said, Babe, I'm going to keep watch over there. If you're afraid, you can sleep in the inner space. All right, you should be careful too. Zhouing took a pure wool military coat from her inner space and handed it to him. Gu Chengrui paused for a moment after receiving it. After hesitating, he took off the leather layer and put it on. Then, he returned to the west room to grab 2 doses of fever and anti-inflammatory medicine, turned around, and left. However, when Zhouing thought of Father Gus' appearance, she couldn't stop worrying. She took the pepper spray and followed him out. She stood at the main entrance until she saw him turn into the door of their old residence. Then, she locked their door and went back to her bedroom to sleep. At his old house, Gu Chengrui had just boiled some medicine, and the 4 people who had sent Father Gu and second Uncle Gu back earlier returned. After Gu Chengrui learned they were injured, he immediately bandaged their wounds. Then, he fed the 2 elderly men medicine and stood guard. The 2 of them still had a fever in the middle of the night. In the end, he had to use an alcohol rub to suppress it. The following day, Gu Chengrui went home for breakfast and was about to drive the donkey cart to town to deliver the goods when Zhouing followed him and said, Rui, I'll go with you to deliver the goods today. Gu Chengrui knew that she was afraid that he would be in danger. However, he also knew that it would be no help even if the 2 of them went together if he were really in trouble. Just as he was about to refuse, Zhouing continued, If you don't let me go, then none of us should go. I'll have someone pass a message to Manager Lu later and have them come over to collect. You, Rui, just bring me along. Zhouing held his arm and leaned her head on his shoulder. You forgot that I have the interspace. If something really happens, we still have a way out. Gu Chengrui looked at how she was holding onto him tightly and knew he had to take her along. He said, I can bring you along, but you must take out 2 bags of knockout powder and prepare an air gun for me. All right. Zhouing prepared the things according to his request and brought the pepper spray she had taken out before. Then, the 2 of them untied Erzhuang and locked their house. They then rushed to town in the donkey cart. When they arrived at the restaurant, the 2 wanted to ask Manager Lu if he knew someone had asked about the braised dishes, but he was not there. The 2 had no choice but to turn around and buy the medicinal herbs for warming and nourishing purposes. Also, they sold 5 pounds of Puraria powder to Dr. Luo at a price of 100 coppers per pound. Zhouing used a basket as a cover after exiting the pharmacy and took out a pound of golden jujubes, a pound of longans, and a pound of goji berries. When they reached the main street, they were about to return when 5 people suddenly jumped out of the alley and blocked their way. Gu Chengrui, right? Our master would like to see you. Please come with us. After saying that, one of them went forward to lead the donkey. His attitude was arrogant, with a posture that didn't seem like he was inviting them, but more like he was kidnapping them. The couple had to go even if they didn't want to, having no say in their choice. Chapter 83 Intent to kill. Seeing this, Gu Chengrui immediately stepped forward and pulled the reins. So, who is your master? Want you know when you get there? Hurry up. Our master is waiting for you. The man looked at his empty hand and stared at Gu Chengrui with embarrassed anger. Why don't you dare to say your names? Why do I feel that you don't look like someone decent? Indeed, it doesn't look like an invitation to me and more like a kidnapping. Could it be that you are robbing us? Zhouing deliberately shouted loudly when she saw this. If the Chow family wanted to make trouble for them, she would ruin their reputation and see if they would still dare to be so arrogant in the future. Then, she thought of something and shouted, "Just who are you people? You're sure bold, robbing in broad daylight before so many people. Do you still have any respect for the law?" The moment she shouted, the people around her immediately hid far away. However, they did not leave, just stood not far away, watching from a distance. Seeing this, the 5 people were quite angry. The leader immediately said, impatiently, "Hurry up. Don't blame us for using force if you dare to dawdle." Still the same question. Who is your master? If you don't even dare to say his name, we won't dare to go. What if you're a bandit? After saying that, someone on the side echoed, "That's right. With your fiendish looks, who would dare to go with you if you don't make things clear? Are they really bandits? What? Look at the clothes they're wearing. Aren't those the clothes of the Chow family's servants?" The Chow family is sure getting more and more arrogant. There's no helping it. Since the Gu family was pulled down, the Chow family has been left unchecked. Isn't this what people often say? Among the blind, the one-eyed man is king. Be careful with what you say and not to get caught. When the man said this, he shook his head and looked at Gu Chungrui and his wife with sympathy. It seems that the young couple is doomed today. More than half of the crowd immediately dispersed. After all, the Chow family was acting pompous recently. It would be troublesome if they targeted them. The voices of the people around them were not loud but not soft either. The 7 people who were surrounded in the middle naturally heard them. Seeing this, the 5 servants blocking the road knew they couldn't delay any longer. Therefore, the leader directly grabbed the donkey's reins and pulled them into an alley. Gu Chungrui knew he could not avoid this, so he nodded and turned to Zhouing. Zhouing understood and took out the things she had prepared before. She then quietly handed him a pack of knockout powder while she hid the pepper spray in her sleeve. Soon, the group stopped at the courtyard entrance, leaving one person to look after their things while the other 4 led the young couple in. When they arrived at the living room entrance, the leader went in to report before bringing them in. After the young couple entered, they saw a middle-aged man sitting in the middle, drinking tea and playing with prayer beads in his hand. The 2 of them looked at each other and stood still, waiting for him to speak. Elder Qiao, sitting opposite them, looked at the calm and composed couple and was very surprised. At the same time, he also had some respect for them, because even he couldn't be so calm in such a situation. However, it was a pity that they were destined not to be friends, and he intended to get rid of them. After all, this young couple would definitely be his obstacles in the future. After that, he put down his teacup and sized up the 2 of them. When did the Gu family become so unruly, not even greeting when meeting someone else? Chapter 84 Bravery. Is this how you treat your guests? Gu Chungrui asked with a smile. After hearing this, Elder Qiao's eyes narrowed, and then he calmly said, "You're quite bold, aren't you? Aren't you afraid that it'll kill you? If you wanted our lives, I don't think we would be here. You're brave. As someone who has died once, what else can't he accept?" Hearing this, Elder Qiao laughed. He knew he would not be able to gain any advantage with his words, so he said directly, "I heard that you have a braised recipe. If you hand it over, I can spare your lives and let you continue to sell tofu." "So you're the one who's been asking for the recipe for the braised intestines? May I know your name?" Gu Chungrui asked him back on purpose to test his temperament. "You don't know who I am? I've never seen you before. Ha ha ha. Interesting, you don't even recognize your enemy. It seems that your father really doesn't care about you." After Elder Qiao said this, he stood up and said, "In that case, how about you come under my wing? I guarantee that you'll be able to live a good life. A person who doesn't dare to say his name is not worth my loyalty." When Elder Qiao said this, he remembered that the recipe was Zhou Ying's. Then, he flicked his sleeves and walked over to her with a smile. "Miss Zhou, if you follow this stubborn and silly boy, you won't have a day where you can make a name for yourself. Why don't you come with me and be my 4th wife? With your craftsmanship and my connections, we can make huge profits from our cooperation. Come and read on our website Wuxiao World site." Thanks, since you know who we are. You should know that although our marriage was to wash away bad luck and married by imperial edict, Zhouing turned her head and said with a blank expression. In other words, their marriage was registered with the emperor. Unless one party died, it would be valid for life. This was also the main reason why the Gu family, including Gu Shengru's original body, insisted on keeping her even if they hated her. When she looked at his oily, fat face, it was so disgusting that she had to look away after only one glance. When Elder Qiao noticed the disdain in her eyes, he was furious, but he knew that she was telling the truth. His face darkened when he thought of this, and he said, "Since you don't know what's good for you, I won't waste my breath on you. As long as you hand over the recipe, I'll let you go. Otherwise, don't blame me for being rude." I've long heard that Elder Qiao has become arrogant and tyrannical. It seems that's your true nature. Gu Chengrui laughed. You're really bold, Elder Qiao said through gritted teeth. Men, he shouted, tie them up and interrogate them. Let them go only after they tell us the recipe. As soon as he finished speaking, the man who had brought them in immediately rushed towards Gu Chengrui. However, as soon as he got close, Gu Chengrui threw him over his shoulder and slammed him to the ground. He grabbed his leg and dislocated his ankle to resolve the situation as quickly as possible. At that time, the remaining 3 people also rushed in. After pausing for a moment, they all ran toward Gu Chengrui. Gu Chengrui was delighted when he saw this. As long as they didn't harass Zhouing, he would go easy on them. He didn't hit them where it hurt, just avoided them and dislocated their arms and legs. In the blink of an eye, only one of the 3 people was still standing, but he didn't dare move forward. Seeing this, Elder Qiao was also quite frightened. According to his investigation, Gu Chengrui should have been only a weak scholar. Elder Qiao did not expect him to know martial arts and, more importantly, to be so good at fighting. Then, while his men were confronting Gu Chengrui, Elder Qiao turned his eyes to Zhouing, who was also watching the show. He quickly ran over and was about to grab Zhou Ying's neck to threaten her. Chapter 85. Ruckus. Zhouing smiled, turned, and took out her pepper spray, spraying it directly on his face. Arg! Elder Qiao screamed. He covered his face and retreated a few steps, screaming non-stop. Seeing this, Gu Chengrui stepped forward and kicked the last person's chin. While he was in a daze, Gu Chengrui dislocated his arm and pushed him to the side. Then, he turned around and pulled Zhouing out. When they rushed out of the house, they ran into the person guarding the entrance and a woman with a rolling pin. Gu Chengrui immediately rushed to the man. Zhouing was afraid of getting injured, so she did not fight the woman head-on. She took her pepper spray and sprayed it at her 3 times. The woman could only cover her face and blindly wave the pin in her hand. Zhouing saw this and went behind her with a smirk on her face. She kicked her butt, causing her to fall into the mud. Gu Chengrui was also done. He smiled and shook his head. Babe, let's go. Zhouing responded and immediately ran out. However, the 2 of them did not go home. Instead, they returned to Hongyun restaurant and informed Chef Zhou of what had happened. They also explained that the goods might not be able to arrive on time tomorrow. After returning home, the 2 gave Tian Jiawang his goods. They took 2 old hens and the medicine they bought from the inner space and went to their old house after locking up. At the entrance, they found that it was full of people and could faintly hear the sound of women crying. Soon after, they saw 6th Aunt Gu standing on a ladder from her house, watching the commotion. The young couple went up to her, and Gu Chengrui asked, 6th Aunt, what happened? Why are there so many people around? When 6th Aunt heard his voice, she turned her head and looked over. She immediately came down the ladder when she saw the 2 of them. Then, she made a shushing gesture at them and pulled them into her house before saying, something happened last night. Did you guys know? I know. I was the one who bandaged and stitched up my father's and 2nd uncle's wounds last night. But what's going on now? Come and read on our website Wuxia World site. Thanks, someone died. You know about the shipwreck, right? I know. Zhouing looked at Gu Chengrui in surprise, as this was the first time she had heard of this. It seemed that their old family was going to go broke this time. She didn't know why, but she suddenly felt a little happy. She wouldn't have invented growing bean sprouts if they hadn't mistreated the original couple. They might have been living mediocrely, but they wouldn't be in such a big disaster. She would like to see if they could continue hiding their money this time. The two families of the dead have come to demand an explanation, said sixth aunt. They are demanding 100 taels each. Your mother and second aunt are crying about how poor they are. However, I don't think they can avoid it this time. No matter what, they have to pay a large sum of money to solve it. And that boat, it's a good mahogany-made boat, and they have to pay at least 100 taels for that. Sixth aunt looked at the things they were carrying and said, I think you two should go back and only come back after this matter is over. Otherwise, Mrs. Liu and Mrs. Yao will definitely not let you off. The young couple looked at each other. They were really in a dilemma. If they were to hide like this, what would their reputation be in the future? But if they didn't leave, Mrs. Liu and Mrs. Yao might demand something from them. In the end, the couple nodded simultaneously and decided to go over. Because no matter whether they hid or not, if Mrs. Liu and Mrs. Yao chose to cling to them, they would not be able to dodge it. It would be better to be on the higher ground so that they would have a good reputation. Thinking of this, Gu Chungrui asked, Sixth aunt, is the village chief and patriarch inside? Chapter 86. Facing the problem they are. They went over as soon as the people over there came. Otherwise, they would have already started fighting instead of just crying and making a scene. Sixth aunt Gu replied, Thank you for telling us, but we still have to go. Gu Chungrui stood up and said, You're still going there even after this? Aren't you afraid of getting entangled in it? We can't avoid it, be it a blessing or a disaster. Since it has already happened, we have to face it. Gu Chungrui bowed to her and picked up the hin, walking out with Zhou. Sixth aunt Gu looked at their backs and shook her head. At the same time, she despised Mrs. Liu and Mrs. Yao even more. They were such a good young couple, but they were almost driven to death by them. No, I have to go and take a look. I can't let them be bullied again. Thinking of this, she poured herself a glass of cold water and gulped it down. After that, she locked the door and hurriedly followed. After the young couple managed to squeeze in, they realized that the number of people in the house was no less than the number outside. They were all sitting there with small stools, as if they were planning to live here if they weren't reimbursed. Gu Qingxi carried a copper pot and shuttled between the crowds, pouring water for them and carefully serving them. The two looked at each other and then walked into the house. When the patriarch saw them coming in with their things, he stood up and said disapprovingly, Why are you guys here? Aren't you supposed to be making tofu? I don't know if I can continue. Gu Chungrui laughed dryly. He did not hide the fact that they had been stopped and threatened to hand over the recipe for the braised intestine. What? The Qiao family has set their sights on you, Mrs. Qiao said with anger. When Mrs. Liu and the others heard that, they gradually weakened their crying and perked up their ears to listen. Come and read on our website Wuxiao World site. Thanks, well, if I didn't know some fighting skills, maybe you would have to collect our bodies tomorrow. Gu Chungrui nodded. The patriarch's face turned extremely ugly after hearing this. This Qiao family was getting increasingly excessive and was planning to continue opposing their clans for more generations. Then, he asked, So what do you plan to do? You can't keep hiding like this. They'll definitely come to you. Let's wait for my father and second uncle to wake up first. Gu Chungrui looked at Gu Chengji and Gu Chengya and asked, By the way, have father and second uncle woken up yet? No. The two men shook their heads in unison. After that, Gu Chengya continued, But their body temperatures have returned to normal, so they should wake up sooner or later. You two should have a seat. Don't just stand. After saying that, he asked the women to squeeze out a bench for them. Thank you, Chengya. Gu Chungrui carried the things in his hands to the foot of the wall and then sat on the bench with Zhou. Uncle, Grandpa Village Chief, did the village investigate yesterday's incident? Do you know who did it? He asked. What do you think? The patriarch asked. I think it's the Qiao family. If the robbers really did it, they wouldn't hurt the hostage. But we don't have any evidence, so you must be careful. I will. Gu Chungrui paused for a moment and nodded. They seemed to have also guessed that the Qiao family had done it, but just had no evidence. However, even if there were enough evidence, it would be useless. The Chow family must have someone to rely on since they dared to be so arrogant. The person backing them was not someone the Gu family could deal with in their current state. There seemed to be only two ways to solve the Chow family's problems. Either they secretly snuffed them out or they found a more powerful backer to oppress the Chow family completely. Otherwise, they would never have another peaceful day in their life. Chapter 87 Compensation 1. We can discuss the Chow family's matter later. Let's hurry up and think about the compensation. It's not good to let your doors be blocked like this anyway. The village chief urged. Indeed. Second aunt, tell us what we should do about this. After the patriarch finished speaking, he looked at Mrs. Chow. However, the way he looked at her was complicated, but most of it was filled with hatred. At that time, Zhouing only remembered that the old madam's surname was Chow. Could it be that the enmity between the two clans was because of her? Then, she raised her head and looked at the old lady seriously. However, because she was too old, she really could not see anything other than the vicissitudes of life and embarrassment. After Mrs. Chow was called out, she sighed deeply. You all know my family's situation. Their request is too high, and we really can't afford it. Can you guys discuss and ask them to lower it slightly, at least come up with a compromise? Indeed, even if an employee in the capital were to get into an accident, it wouldn't cost 100 taels of silver. They are clearly extorting us. Mrs. Liu said as she wiped her tears. That's right. The imperial court only gives each family a death gratuity of 10 taels of silver as compensation. Mrs. Yao agreed. Then why don't you guys give us a number? We can sit down and discuss it. If you guys keep crying like this, you won't be able to solve the problem. The village chief said impatiently. Indeed, just say a number that you can agree on. At least we'll have a better idea of your lower limit, right? The patriarch agreed. After hearing this, Mrs. Liu and Mrs. Yao looked at each other and said simultaneously, 10 taels each. Then you guys can talk among yourselves. The village chief immediately stood up to leave. Uncle Qian, don't lower yourself to their level. The patriarch quickly stopped him. After he finished, he looked at the two women angrily and scolded. What are you thinking? Even buying a strong laborer at the market can cost 12 to 15 taels. Come and read on our website Wuxiao World site. Thanks. If you're still so insincere, then we won't bother anymore. But we've lost the goods, the ship is gone, and even my husband is still lying in bed. We really can't afford that much money. Mrs. Liu said with a face full of grievance. The patriarch's expression turned even more complicated when he heard this. That's right, there was still a ship. That ship belonged to the oil mill and was the public property of the clan. They had to reimburse that too. He was speechless and regretful. It seemed that he should not have been soft-hearted and lent it to them. However, the only thing he could do now was to reduce the compensation as much as possible. The village chief looked at his complex expression and also thought of the boat. For a moment, his head hurt even more. Mrs. Chow saw their faces getting ugly, and she was afraid they would leave them alone. At that time, their house was likely to be raided. She sighed and asked, Village chief, how is compensation usually given when something like this happens? This mainly depends on the family's situation. We would naturally give more if the deceased had elderly or young children. If they are single, you can help buy a good coffin to bury them in and give some money for the burial to the clan. The village chief sighed. Today, the situation of these two families is not looking good. One of them is from another village. Not only did he have a lot of elderly people and children, but he was also the only child in the family. Although the other one is from our village and has a lot of family members, they are very poor, so they won't easily give in. After Mrs. Chow heard it, she gritted her teeth. It seemed that it was really not that easy to deal with this. The problem was that it would be difficult to find help in the future if they made a scene. After pondering for a moment, she replied, Now, the best quality dry land is 8 taels of silver per acre. We will pay 50 taels of silver, equivalent to 5 acres of land to support the family, with the remaining 10 taels of silver as a burial fee. Chapter 88 Compensation 2. Mother, that's too much. When Mrs. Lu and Mrs. Yao heard this, they retorted at the same time. 50 taels for one family, 2 families would be 100 taels, equivalent to 2 years' output of 100 acres of land. You guys shut up. Mrs. Chiao's sharp eyes glared. Sister-in-law, if you've made up your mind, then we'll call the person to discuss it, the village chief said. All right, go ahead. Mrs. Chiao nodded. When the patriarch saw this, he immediately got up and went out. He called in 2 men who were in charge of the 2 families. After they sat down, the village chief said a few polite words before talking about the compensation. Of course, the other side couldn't agree at the beginning. However, under the tearful complaints of Mrs. Lu, Mrs. Yao, and the other women, it was finally set at 60 taels of silver for each family. After confirming, the patriarch said, "There's also the matter of the boat. Since it's not easy for your family, you can pay it off in 2 years. 30 taels a year, and the end of the year." What? A broken boat costs 60 taels of silver? Mrs. Yao exclaimed. That's an excellent mahogany-made boat. You can calculate how much the wood alone costs. The patriarch said in an unpleasant tone, "Mother, let's just listen to the patriarch." Gu Qingji gave Mrs. Yao a look at this time. He had seen that boat, and it was a medium-sized boat that needed at least 4 people to row. 60 taels of silver weren't considered expensive for that. Sob, I really can't continue living like this. When Mrs. Lu saw this, she knew the patriarch was not extorting them. This time, she cried for real. With such a large sum of money out, they would have to wait 10 years before they could recover if their family had no substantial business. When Mrs. Yao saw her crying, she also began to cry. Mrs. Huang and the other concubines also immediately began to cry. All right, stop crying. Hurry up and get the silver. The patriarch slammed the table impatiently. Come and read on our website Wuxiao World site. Thanks, he had asked them to cry because he wanted to save them some money. But now that it had been decided, what was the point of crying? It was better to take out the silver and settle the matter quickly. 60 taels per family. Hurry up and take it, Mrs. Chiao said at this time. Mother. Mrs. Lu turned her head and shouted with a face of unwillingness. The old thing also had silver in her hands. Why did she ask them to take theirs out? Hurry up, Mrs. Chiao shouted with a straight face. Mrs. Yao knew she couldn't avoid it and could only slowly walk out. Mrs. Lu looked at Gu Qingrui and said, Qingrui, you know what's going on at home. You and your wife should at least contribute something, right? Without waiting for Gu Qingrui to speak, the patriarch and Mrs. Chiao shouted simultaneously, Shut up. Of course, the reasons for the 2 people stopping her were different. The former was unhappy about Mrs. Liu's tone and stood up for the young couple. The latter was more concerned about their dignity. Previously, the husband and wife had left the family with nothing. If they were forced to pay up now, they would really lose their remaining dignity. Mrs. Lu was startled by their repeated attempts to stop her and could only obediently return to her room to get the silver. Fortunately, the 2 of them weren't stupid. The silver they took out was in small broken amounts, and they added in strings of copper coins. Mrs. Yao had even taken out the silver hairpin she had bought earlier, giving off the feeling that she was at the end of her rope. Regardless of whether the people believed it or not, the 2 families felt much better after the patriarch helped them increase the amount of silver they had received. As soon as they left, the people who were watching the show gradually left as well. The patriarch stood up and said, Aunt, since we're done here, we'll be leaving now. Let me know in advance if you need anything in the future. All right, they'll come to thank you when the 2 brothers wake up, Mrs. Chiao said as she stood up and sent him and the village chief out. After they were sent off, Gu Qingrui went to see Father Gu and second Uncle Gu. After ensuring their condition had stabilized, he asked Mrs. Lu to prepare some millet porridge and went home. Chapter 89, The Feud Between Gu and Xiao, 1. When they came out, they saw the patriarch waiting outside their door not far away. The couple immediately jogged over and asked, Uncle, were you waiting for us? Yeah, let me tell you about the Xiao family. The patriarch nodded. Then let's talk at home. Gu Qingrui brought him home after that. When they reached home, Gu Qingrui brought him directly into the living room while Zhouing tied Erzhuang up. She then went to the kitchen and started the fire. She boiled some water, made a pot of ordinary Longjing tea, and brought it back to the house. She then poured a cup of tea for each of them and sat on the brick bed. "Sensing is also here. Tell me your thoughts," the patriarch suggested as he picked up the teacup and blew on it while slowly drinking the tea. Gu Chengrui nodded and glanced at Zhou. "Uncle, I've discussed this with Ing before. I'd rather give the recipe for the braised intestines for free to someone else than to the Chow family. Yes, there's a phrase called insatiable. If we compromise this time, they might become even more demanding in the future. When that time comes, we only have two choices. One is to continue to compromise, become their slaves, and be their dogs. Since we are going to resist sooner or later, why don't we start now? We'll let him know that the Gu family isn't easy to deal with." Zhou Ying agreed. "Insatiable, that's an apt way to put it. We really can't back down on this matter. Otherwise, I'm afraid that there won't be a place for the Gu clan in Shanghe village." The patriarch said in agreement. "I won't hide it from you," he continued. "The oil mill hasn't been stable recently. If I hadn't found out in time, something might have happened to it." "What happened? They want to destroy the oil mill?" Gu Chengrui asked in surprise. "You can say that. Our clan's oil mill has persisted until today because of Master Wan's skills. The oil he can produce is fragrant, clean, and clear. Even the county headquarters uses our oil. Come and read on our website Wuxiao World site. Thanks about half a month ago, he was almost kidnapped. If it weren't for the people from the oil mill who found out in time, our oil mill wouldn't have been able to last. Recently, I asked your brother Qinjian to send someone to investigate and finally found out about Dongxin Building, which is the Chow family's business. So that's how it is." "Then, uncle, you mean that we should unite and resist together?" Gu Chengrui nodded in understanding. "That's right. Since the Chow family doesn't want us to live a peaceful life, we don't have to be afraid of them. May I ask, how did the Gu and Chow families become enemies?" The patriarch froze for a moment. He sighed and continued, "Speaking of which, I have to start from the generation of your great-grandfather, who is my grandfather. 100 years ago, my grandfather and the older generation of the Chow family were brothers who fought together. After their business gradually started to build up, the two families got married and had children one after another. When your grandmother, the eldest daughter of the Chow family, was born, she was engaged to your grandfather. Unfortunately, later on, the great-grandfather of the Chow family had some other thoughts and took in a concubine. That concubine was ambitious and took advantage of the time when old Master Chow was out to harm your great-grandmother. As the saying goes, with a stepmother comes a stepfather. Your grandmother suffered a lot at home later. Fortunately, your grandfather grew up and liked your grandma, so they got married smoothly. However, after they got married, your grandmother's stepsister, also your great-aunt, had her eyes on your grandfather. She even almost caused your grandmother to have a miscarriage when she was pregnant. Later on, your great-aunt was tricked by your grandmother into marrying a drunkard and was beaten to death. When that concubine found out, she wanted to exact revenge, but old Master Chow stopped her and imprisoned her in the estate. Chapter 90: The Feud Between Gu and Xiao. 2. The patriarch took a sip of water and said, "Originally, this matter should have ended here. Who knew that the concubine would die in the courtyard for some unknown reason, and all kinds of signs pointed to your grandmother. Although it was later found out that the concubine died of sickness, the concubine's son, who is your great-uncle, still blamed it on your grandmother and grandfather. Later on, your great-uncle schemed against your grandfather, but he didn't expect your grandfather to turn the tables against him. Not only did your grandfather make a fortune, but he also got in touch with a noble. Since then, his business has been growing bigger and bigger. What they didn't expect was that the fight between them caused your great-grandfather to lose his life, and since then, the two families have completely broken off." Gu Chengrui did not know what to say for a moment. "Concubine is the root of all evil," Zhou Ying said. The patriarch was stunned for a moment. Although it's an exaggeration, it makes sense. Nothing good happens when there are too many women. Therefore, without huge benefits, I'm afraid there's no possibility of reconciliation between the two families, he said. You must be careful in the future. Also, if the situation doesn't look good, let me know. The entire Gu clan must unite. I understand. Then the Qin clan. The patriarch pondered a moment and said, We've lived together for so many years, so they're worth trusting. Besides, you've saved the Qin family members' lives twice in a row, so they shouldn't stab us in the back. However, black sheep are also among them, so we still have to be careful. I understand, Gu Qingrui replied. Yup, that old coot from the Chow family is a sinister and grudge-holding person. Don't be careless. Thank you for your reminder, Uncle. We're a family. Don't be so polite. You guys go ahead as I have to go to the oil mill. After the patriarch finished speaking, he stood up and walked out. Come and read on our website Wuxiao World site. Thanks. After he left, the couple drank a glass of water and told the Hua they were going up the mountain. When they reached the mountain, they each took a saw and began to cut some dead wood. They kept the big ones for later use, while turning the small ones into firewood and storing them in the inner space. Otherwise, the firewood stored at home would not be enough if they were to make yuba every day. On the other hand, as soon as manager Lu returned, Chef Zhou told him how the Chow family had threatened Gu Chengruei and his wife. Manager, what do we do now? Do we buy tofu from another shop, or do we just drop in to collect the goods? Braised intestine recipe? It's the one that you bought from the dock, right? Yes, I've tried it. It's similar to braised dried tofu. It should be the same recipe. But yeah, Miss Gus' cooking skills are excellent. I still haven't figured out what spices were used in it. After saying that, Chef Zhou hesitated for a moment before asking, Why don't we buy the recipe? Manager Lu shook his head. We could have asked if it was before. Now that the Chow family has made a move, it would be akin to looting a burning house if we asked now. Let's wait for them to offer. As for the tofu, it's better to go to them and get the goods. Yuba is our main dish at the moment, and no one can make it. All right, they'll send someone over tomorrow morning. After saying that, Chef Zhou turned around and walked out. Remember to bring some silver when you go. Understood. The Chow family. After Elder Chow had recovered from his treatment, he used a cold towel to cool his eyes and gritted his teeth as he said to his butler, Xiao Mu, later on, find someone to teach that pair of little bastards a lesson properly. Since they refuse my kindness, then I'll make them kneel and beg me to take their recipe. Chapter 91. Something bad happened, yes, sir. Don't worry. They'll definitely get the recipe. Xiao Mu quickly nodded in agreement. At the same time, he was already thinking about how to deal with the couple. By the way, how are the two brothers from the Gu family? Are they still alive? Master, I heard they are still alive but haven't woken up yet. Oh, they're really lucky. Who treated them? I heard that it was Gu Chengruei. They bought a lot of supplements this morning. What a bitch. He's already been chased out of the house, yet he still helps them out. Although Xiao Mu disagreed with what he said, he did not refute him and only nodded in response. All right, you can leave now. Keep an eye on the Gu family. We can't let them rise up again. Yes, they'll make the arrangements. After Xiao Mu finished speaking, he turned around and left the study room. After he came out, he immediately called a servant over and gave him a few instructions, asking him to do something. However, as soon as the two separated, the servant was stopped by Cui for some questioning before he could leave. Cui hurriedly ran back to the backyard and said, Miss, it's bad. Something bad happened. Shut up. Don't you know how to speak? Nothing bad will happen to me. Miss Lu, whose real name was Miss Chiao, knocked on her head and said, Yes, me and my stupid mouth. Cui quickly apologized. All right, hurry up and tell me what happened out there. Miss Chiao said after sitting down. Yes, Cui replied. She then told her everything about how Elder Chiao had tried to forcefully demand Gu Chengruei and his wife for their recipe, how they had counterattacked, and how Xiao Mu had finally decided to deal with them. What? How did they get into a fight so quickly? Miss Chiao said in a panic. Come and read on our website Wuxiao World site. Thanks, it's all Zhou Ying's fault. If it weren't for the braised intestine recipe in her hands, they wouldn't have attracted the master's attention this quickly. No wonder the villagers call her a jinx. She's really unlucky. At this point, Miss Chow paused and said uneasily, "But what should we do now? Brother Gu is definitely not Uncle Chow's match. Why don't you go and beg master, young lady?" Chuyer hesitated for a moment before raising her head. "Are you stupid? My father wants nothing more than the death of the Gu family. How can he let them go?" Miss Chow expressed her displeasure. "It looks like the only way out now is for Dr. Gu to marry into the family," she said shyly. But Dr. Gu now, so we can't wait any longer. There's not much ointment left. Go and ask him to send the ointment to the manor tomorrow." "Yes, I will give out orders immediately. Remember, you must avoid my father's people." "I know. Don't worry, miss." Chuyer ran out with a smile after she finished. Miss Chow blushed and smiled. She got up, walked to the dressing table, and examined her face. Although there were still some red pimple marks on her face, it was much better than her swollen face from before. It also revealed her round, sweet, and lovely face. When she saw this, she couldn't help but think of the handsome, slender, serious, and highly skilled Gu Chungrui. However, her expression immediately froze when she thought of his attitude towards her. She couldn't understand how she couldn't compare to Zhouing. In terms of status, although Zhouing was a young lady of a political family, she was not favored at all. She was not as pampered as she was, the legitimate daughter of a merchant. However, in terms of appearance, she had never seen her before. So, it seemed like she had to meet her. Chapter 92 Report 1. In the evening, it was already dark when Zhou Ying and her husband returned home. They were exhausted after a day on the mountain. When they returned home, Gu Chungrui still had to head to their old house to see how the two patients were doing. If they were awake, he would be entirely at ease. Zhouing moved some firewood out of her interspace and stacked it in the shed. Then, she simply washed her face and started a fire to cook dinner. The meal was simple. She stir-fried a plate of cabbage with vinegar, mixed it with a plate of mustard and fungus, and finally took out a roasted chicken from her interspace. She cut it up and put it on a plate. Finally, she cooked a small pot of rice and mung bean congee. When she was almost done, Gu Chungrui returned. She turned and asked, "Rui, how's it going over there?" "They're all awake but still weak and need to recuperate. I've brought them some medicine. You don't have to worry about the rest. We'll find some time tomorrow and remove their stitches." "Okay, go wash your hands. I'll set the table." "All right. I'm so hungry that my chest is sticking to my back," Gu Chungrui said as he turned around to wash up. Zhouing laughed and shook her head. She used to hear the old people say that youngsters would usually eat until they were poor. At that time, she had thought it was an exaggeration, but now she understood. He had eaten a big bowl of ramen at noon and half a pound of beef. She didn't expect him to be this hungry so soon. She looked at the food she had prepared as she thought of that. Finally, she took out 3 big steamed buns, cut them into pieces, and plated them after deep frying. After dinner, Gu Chungrui cleaned up the kitchen while Zhouing entered her interspace and used her mental power to pick out 100 pounds of soybeans to soak in. Then, she braised 2 sets of pig offal. After they were done, the two of them were about to lie down and sleep when they suddenly heard Zhuang's bark and a faint knock on the door. Gu Chungrui was stunned for a moment. He put on his wool coat and walked out. When he came out, he heard a clear knock on the door, but it was not loud. He paused before walking over and asked, "Who is it?" "Dr. Gu, it's U.S. Tiger and Leopard Brothers. We're here to report to you," Zhuang said in a low voice. Gu Chungrui recognized his voice, so he opened the door and let them in. He closed the door and led them into the house. When Zhouing saw them come in, she stopped for a moment and said, "Please have a seat." She then poured a glass of warm water for each of them. The two of them looked at Zhouing and smiled awkwardly. After taking the cup and sitting down, they drank it in one gulp. Gu Chungrui hesitated and said, "Ing, can you go make a bowl of noodles for each of them?" Zhouing nodded, turned around, and walked out. She went to the kitchen and made 2 big bowls of noodles for them with poached eggs. At the same time, Gu Chungrui refilled their glasses of water and asked, "Brothers, tell me, what did you find?" "We've investigated the strangers you mentioned in the village. They came from other villages to learn how to grow bean sprouts, and one of them was really into monitoring the people in the village. They mainly go back and forth between the oil mill and your house. However, this evening, we discovered that a servant girl from the Chow family went to Widow Hua's house. Qin Zhuang said, "A servant girl from the Chow family? Are you sure she's a servant girl from the Chow family?" "That's right. There's basically no one in this area that we don't know. That maidservant is from the manor on the other side of the river. She's the wet nurse of the Chow clan's eldest daughter and has a very good relationship with her." Yes, yes. Widow Hua's daughter, Chun Hong, is a servant who cooks in their manor. Gu'er Jiang chimed in. Chapter 93 Report 2. So that peach garden on the other side of the river belongs to the Chow family and not the Lu family? Gu Chengrui asked in shock. After Qin Zhuang and Gu Erjiang looked at each other, they both looked at him in surprise. However, when they remembered he had just returned from the capital and rarely went out, they understood his surprise. Gu Erjiang replied, "It's right to say it belongs to the Lu family. Miss Chow's mother's last name is Lu. That manor is her mother's dowry." "I see." Gu Chengrui nodded thoughtfully. Then, Miss Lu, whom he had seen before, was most likely Miss Chow. Thinking of this, his eyes flickered. "Did you find anything else?" he asked. "There's also the matter of people eyeing the braised intestine recipe you mentioned. The Chow family is just one of them. There's also the Uli Inn, and their people have also inquired about it." Gu Chengrui quipped, "By the way, do you know what's going on with the Chow family? Why does no one take action when they are being so ridiculous?" "You've asked the right person. About a month ago, we met the Chow's butler's son, Chow Yuan, in the casino. At that time, he was drunk and told us that the Chow family had become rich and someone was protecting them. This time, the tables have turned, and it's the Gu family's turn to suffer." "Oh, did he say who it was?" "No, he just made a slip of the tongue. He refused to say it when I asked him later. However, I heard that the Chow family sent generous gifts to the county mayor, and the mayor's wife has someone above her." "The wife of the county mayor?" "Yes, the wife of the mayor. I heard that even the mayor has to listen to her." "Is there any more?" "We have limited time, so," Qin Zhuang said with an awkward smile. "All right, you can continue to ask around. In addition, pay attention to any major movements of the Chow family and remember to let me know in time." After Gu Chengrui finished speaking, he got up and went to the west room to take out a string of money and give it to them. "Go to places like tea houses and taverns where there are many more people gossiping. Listen more and ask less. Safety first. Don't worry, we two brothers will definitely get this done for you." Qin Zhuang immediately smiled and put away the money. At this time, Zhouing also came in with 2 big bowls of noodles and handed them to them. "Do eat up." Thank you, thank you." The two of them nodded and took the food, then began to eat it. Gu Chengrui told Zhouing the news he got from them after they left. "Babe, I'm afraid I've encountered a honey trap this time. You must protect me." "Go on." Zhouing glared at him, then said thoughtfully, "Elder Qiao can't wait to destroy the Gu family. So do you think he will let his daughter marry you? Isn't he afraid of inviting a wolf into his house?" Gu Chengrui laughed after hearing that. He raised his head and flicked her nose. "Smart. We've thought of the same thing, but we can make good use of this. It might give us a chance to catch our breath. Anyhow, we'll make our move after we find out who's behind the Chow family. Then you will be the honey trap. If I have to use the honey trap, it should be on you. She's not worthy. Be careful not to fall into her trap instead," Zhouing said, rolling her eyes. Afterwards, she took the 2 bowls to the kitchen to wash them. Seeing this, Gu Chengrui smiled. For the sake of a peaceful life in the future, he had to be wary of Miss Chow. The following day, just as Hongyan Restaurant had finished collecting their goods, Widow Hua's daughter, Chun Hong, came to their house and said, "Dr. Gu, Miss Lu asked me to bring you a message. She said that her ointment has been used up, and she wants you to go to the manor for a follow-up examination today." Chapter 94. A warning. After speaking, she turned her head and looked at Zhouing. When she saw her appearance, she was stunned. She had looked at her in a hurry before, and her first impression of her was of a timid, dark, and thin girl. Other than her height, there was nothing special about Zhouing. Zhouing was now fair and slender. Not only did she become beautiful, but she also had an indescribable aura that made others feel comfortable and a little scared. She was slightly more afraid of her than when she faced Miss Chiao. "Dr. Gu, remember to go," she said, quickly looking away. After saying that, she ran away in a hurry. That scary?" Zhouing touched her face in surprise. "She's the one who's weird," Gu Chengrui replied, then instructed, "We'll go there in a while and see what she's up to. You be careful at home." "I know. You be careful too." "I will." After Gu Chengrui finished speaking, he turned around and went back to pack his medicine kit. This time, he didn't only bring the common medicine but also a pack of knockout powder, a bag of powder mixed with devil pepper and mustard, as well as an air gun. Then, he walked out. After he left, De Hua and Tian Jiawang came in. Zhouing and De Hua helped Tian Jiawang pack the goods he wanted. Then, Zhouing called Tian Jiawang to the side and told him they had been stopped by the Chow family yesterday. "If someone tries to cause you trouble, you don't have to help us. Just say what you must, and don't force it." "How can we do that?" Tian Jiawang shook his head repeatedly. Although he was a nobody, he was not an ungrateful person. If it weren't for the help of the couple, he would still be risking his life looking for wild animals on the mountain. How could he betray them? Then, does Brother Tian know the recipe for braised meat? Tian Jiawang was at a loss for words. It seemed that she was right. The things he knew were just on the surface level. Then, he nodded and said, "I understand. Yup, safety first. De Hua, help your Aunt Zhou with her work. Uncle is leaving." After Tian Jiawang finished speaking, he pulled the small cart and went out. Zhouing took De Hua to the kitchen and continued to make yuba. On the other hand, Gu Chengrui had not gone far from the village when he was stopped by 6 people who came out of the small forest by the roadside. Gu Chengrui saw that they were all holding sticks in their hands and immediately knew they were not friendly. Then, he turned sideways and quietly took out the bag of knockout powder and the air gun. At the same time, he asked, "What do you all mean by this?" "What do we mean?" The leader sneered and shook the stick in his hand, saying, "You know what you did yesterday, but you still dared to leave the village. You sure have guts." "The Chow family sent you?" Gu Chengrui deliberately took 2 steps back in fear. As expected of someone who passed the scholar's exam, seeing through it so quickly. "Since you know who we are, obediently come with us, and save us the trouble of beating you up. You guys are absolutely unruly." After Gu Chengrui finished speaking, he turned around and ran away. At the same time, he turned back to look at them. When they caught up and gathered together, Gu Chengrui immediately threw the powder bag in his hands and shot through it with his air gun. Suddenly, the powder fell down like scattered flowers. The few of them heard the sound and immediately looked up, and the powder just happened to fall on their faces. A moment later, they fell to the ground like dumplings. Seeing this, Gu Chengrui went forward to check and ensure they were all unconscious. He rolled on the ground, staining his clothes with bits of grass and dust. Then, he messed up his hair and ran toward the manor over the river. Chapter 95. Discord. Chuayer, who was waiting outside the manor, saw his sorry state and hurriedly greeted him. "Dr. Gu, what's wrong? Did you fall down?" Gu Chengrui did not answer her. Instead, he asked in an unfriendly tone, "Your family's young lad's surname isn't Liu, but Xiao, right?" Chuayer was shocked when she heard this. She then laughed dryly and replied, "Who told you that?" "My young miss." Gu Chengrui snorted coldly when he saw her avoiding his gaze. Then, he walked straight into the manor. Chuayer saw this and immediately chased after him, feeling uneasy. It seemed that the young lad's identity had been revealed. The 2 of them entered the main courtyard one after another. Miss Chiao happened to come out of the kitchen with a pot of iced pear juice. When she saw Gu Chengrui enter, she quickly greeted him warmly. "Dr. Gu, you're here. I've just made a pot of dessert for you to try." "Chuayer, go get a bowl," she said to Chuayer. After speaking, she called Gu Chengrui into the house with her. As soon as the 2 sat down, Chuayer hurriedly followed them with a bowl in her hand. Seeing that the 2 of them were still politely talking, She heaved a sigh of relief and went forward to get some dessert. Gu Chungrui placed the aloe vera cream on the table and looked at Miss Chiao. Miss Liu, what's your surname? Miss Chiao's heart skipped a beat, and she quickly looked at Chui'er, who was also stunned. Chui'er immediately shook her head with a bitter face. She was still puzzled about this matter and didn't know who leaked it. My surname is Chiao. I was afraid. Miss Chiao gritted her teeth. There's no need to say anything. The ointment has been delivered, so please pay the medical expenses. As for your illness, it's not really an illness. It'll be fine if you pay attention to your diet and personal hygiene. It'll be going back now. Gu Chungrui said with a straight face after he got up. Come and read on our website Wuxiao World site. Thanks. When Miss Chiao heard his cold and emotionless words, her aggrieved eyes suddenly welled up with tears. The grudges of the previous generation are between them, and it has nothing to do with us. Without waiting for her to finish, Gu Chungrui raised his hand and interrupted her. He said sarcastically, Who would believe your words? Didn't you ask me to come here? But I didn't expect that you would send someone to attack me on the way when I was kind enough to send you the medicine. No, Miss Chiao immediately started to explain in a panic. However, Gu Chungrui had no intention of listening. Even after encountering that group of people today, he still risked coming here. To put it bluntly, he was clarifying his position and trying to sow discord between the father and daughter. That's enough. You don't have to explain anymore. Anyway, it's impossible between us. We don't have to meet again in the future. Pay up. What? You even want to skimp out on the money for the medicine? No, Then hurry up. Gu Chungrui said impatiently. Chui'er took out a piece of silver from her purse and said, That should be enough. Gu Chungrui took the silver, carried the medicine kit on his back, and walked out. The speed at which he left was as if a dog was chasing him. Miss Chiao wanted to chase after him, but Chui'er immediately stopped her. Please don't chase him, Mississippi. You won't be able to catch up. Miss Chiao immediately remembered that Chui'er had taken the initiative to pay. She turned her head and raised her hand to slap her. She roared, Who told you to make the decision and give him the silver? Chui'er covered the half of her face that had been slapped and said aggrievedly, Young miss, I'm doing this for your own good. Dr. Gu is obviously in a fit of anger. He won't listen to anything you say, and it's better to let him leave first. Chapter 96. A bunch of idiots. When Miss Chiao heard her say this, she remembered Gu Shengrui's attitude toward her just now, making her angry and annoyed. She was rushing to please him as a young lady, yet he was this insensible. It was really irritating. I'm sorry, Chui'er. I hit you in a moment of anger. Please don't take it to heart. Although Chui'er knew that her apology wasn't sincere, she also knew that she had no right to argue with her. She could only say, Miss, Dr. Gu just said someone tried to attack him on the road. Could it be Master had made a move, so he mistakenly thought it was your arrangement? It's most likely true. It seems that we have to go back to the residence so you can find out what happened. Miss Chiao nodded in agreement. At the same time, she was also anxious. She had not even developed a close relationship with Dr. Gu, and now this had happened. She was afraid it would be more difficult to get close to him in the future. She thought about this and got a headache. Then, she said, Also, send someone to keep an eye on Uncle Chiao. If they do anything, remember to let me know immediately. Chui'er knew what she was up to. She shook her head and said, Young miss, please spare me. If Master finds out that we leaked the information, he will definitely beat me to death. I'm here. What are you afraid of? I won't give you up when the time comes. But, no buts. When have I ever mistreated you? If you continue to be like this, you don't have to serve me anymore. Miss Chiao said with a dark face. Chui'er was immediately afraid. Her young lady usually looked soft and weak, but she was a ruthless person deep down. Chui'er didn't want to be sold to those dirty places. After that, they packed up and took the ointment back to town. Come and read on our website Wuxiao World site. Thanks. Not long after Gu Chungrui left, Xiao Mu arrived with his men. He was shocked to see them lying on the ground and quickly walked over to check on them. After confirming that they were only unconscious, he slapped each of them a few times before they woke up. When the 6 people woke up, They were in a rage, but immediately became well-behaved when they saw Xiao Mu. Each and every one of them drooped their heads and said, "Chief Xiao, what's going on? Where's the person I asked you to kidnap?" Xiao Mu asked in a bad mood. "We didn't expect him to have drugs and hidden weapons, so," the leader replied in a low voice. When Xiao Mu heard this, she pointed at them with her finger and said resentfully, "A bunch of idiots. I already warned you to be careful, but you still fell for it." "Really, Chief Xiao, why don't we just kidnap that woman?" The leader immediately smiled apologetically. "But the village? Let's go around the mountain. Didn't Blackie say they were staying at the foot of the mountain?" Xiao Mu's eyes brightened when she heard this. Capturing that little lady was the right thing to do. Most importantly, she was easy to deal with as a woman. Finally, she nodded and said, "All right, let's end this quickly. Otherwise, it'll be troublesome if the villagers block us." "Don't worry, we're all men. If we can't deal with a little girl, we're better off dead." After the leader finished speaking, he turned around and led his men to the mountain. Meanwhile, Xiao Mu also followed after hesitating for a moment. It would naturally be best if he could ask for the recipe right there on the mountain. The group of people quietly went around to the back of the mountain. Seeing there were not many people in the village, they boldly ran to the Gu couple's house. However, before they reached the door, Zhuang barked loudly. His bark was urgent and loud. Obviously, something was wrong. Chapter 97. Ill-intentioned Zhou, who was busy in the kitchen, heard Zhuang's abnormal barks and immediately rushed out. She was met by 6 big men with sticks, 3 of whom even surrounded Zhuang. This made her immediately realize that the other party had come with ill intentions, so she didn't even say a word and immediately took out a pepper spray and hid it in her sleeve. When the leader saw Zhou, he was stunned for a moment. Then, his eyes lit up with an evil smile. "You must be Mrs. Gu, right? If you have nothing else, please leave," Zhou said vigilantly. "Seeing that you're as pretty as a flower, we won't make things difficult for you. Come with us." After the leader finished speaking, he sized her up and ensured that there was nothing in her hands. Then, he walked toward her with a stick in his hand. Zhou stared at his stick. Seeing that he didn't instantly make a move, she finally breathed a sigh of relief. It wasn't until he grabbed her hand that Zhou suddenly aimed the pepper spray at his face and sprayed it 3 times. At the same time, she took 2 steps back and jumped out of his stick's range. The leader let out a blood-curdling screech and immediately covered his face with the hand about to grab her. With his other hand, he swung the stick at the spot where she had been standing. When Zhou saw this, she turned around and sprayed at the others. However, when they saw their leader's miserable state, none dared to step forward. However, they didn't retreat. They immediately surrounded her and said, "You'll run out of the things in your hands sooner or later. You'd better come with us. Otherwise, don't blame us for being rough with you." Zhou snorted coldly and ignored them. She approached Zhuang as she sprayed the pepper spray. She removed the leash on his neck when she got to his side and let him out, because she clearly knew that even if nothing happened to her after being captured by them, she would be gossiped about when she returned. At that time, how could she have a foothold in the village? Come and read on our website Wuxiao World site. Thanks, therefore, she could only persevere. As long as she could hold on a little longer, she would be saved when the people from the village came. Then, she retreated to the shed and simply grabbed the sticks of firewood to throw at them, especially the leader, because he couldn't use his eyes anymore and could only wave the stick in his hand blindly. Therefore, Zhou deliberately threw it at his lower body, making him flustered. He even hit his people with his stick from time to time. When the others saw this, they were all furious. After looking at each other, they decided to attack together. After all, no one would die from this. As long as one of them could catch her, it would be over. After Zhou saw through their intentions, she remembered the knockout powder that Gu Chungrui had left for her. She immediately took out a packet and crushed the paper packet when they came over, throwing it at them. When the few of them saw the powder, they subconsciously withdrew it. Nonetheless, 2 of them were still knocked out. Zhou smiled when she saw this. Then, she retreated to the front of the woodpile and used the woodpile as a cover. She took out a large bag of dried limestone powder from the corner, scooped up a small pile, and threw it above them. Seeing this, the remaining 3 people didn't dare approach her, but they weren't stupid. They separated and surrounded her in 3 directions. Seeing this, Zhou prepared a bag of lime powder, opened it, and held it in her hand. At the same time, she aimed the pepper spray in one direction, but someone still rushed into the shed from behind. Zhou immediately threw the lime powder out, turned her head, and sprayed the pepper spray at him to scare him away. However, this gave the other side a chance. Seeing this, Zhou took an air gun from her interspace under the cover of her coat. She turned around and shot it at his eyes. Bang! The man let out a heart-wrenching scream. Chapter 98. More discord in the village. Erzhuang's barking did not initially attract any attention. After all, dogs have very sharp ears and will bark at the slightest sound. However, when they heard human screams, they finally realized something was wrong. In particular, Sister Tian heard it and immediately ran over. When she saw the scene in the courtyard, she was so scared that her legs turned jelly. She finally regained some strength after thinking of her daughter, who was still inside. However, she also knew she wouldn't be of help even if she went in, so she turned around and ran to the oil mill, telling the patriarch what had happened here. When the patriarch heard this, he knew that things were bad and immediately called out, "All workers, carry your tools and go to Gu Shengru's house to help." Most of the people here were from the Gu clan. When they heard this, they each found their tools and rushed out without a word. He greeted some villagers as he ran out. Not long after, he ran into Erzhuang, who was barking on the street. "Erzhuang," the patriarch called out. Erzhuang heard the familiar voice and immediately ran over. He circled around him and bit his sleeve, wanting to drag him home. Seeing this, the patriarch patted his head and ran toward the Gu couple's house. Everyone immediately ran after him. When Xiao Mu, who was waiting halfway up the mountain, saw the people suddenly gathering in the village, he knew that something had gone wrong. However, it was too late to save his people now, so he just rushed back to town with his remaining men. On the other hand, when the patriarch and the others arrived, only the man who had dodged Zhou Ying's limestone powder was left standing. However, after seeing the endless variety of tools in Zhou Ying's hands, he didn't dare to take another step forward. He only confronted her with a stick. When he heard the hurried and messy footsteps outside, he knew something was wrong. People were coming, and there were quite a number of them. His legs suddenly went soft, and he almost dropped to the ground. Come and read on our website Wuxiao World site. Thanks then. He looked at Zhou Ying with her pepper spray and then at his companions, who were in a sorry state. He hesitated for a moment, turned around, and ran out. However, as soon as he stepped out of the door, he was blocked by 2 young men and pushed to the side. The patriarch came in with his people. When he saw Zhou Ying holding limestone powder in her hand, he was stunned and asked, "Miss Zhou, are you all right?" "I'm fine. I've made sufficient preparations." Zhou Ying shook her head. After that, she felt relieved as her legs gave out, leaning against the pile of firewood. Erzhuang scuttled out at this moment and ran in front of her, nuzzling his head against her leg to comfort her. Zhou Ying smiled and patted his head. At the same time, the patriarch saw that she was not injured and immediately waved his hand. "Tie them up and take them to the ancestral hall." The crowd immediately rushed forward and tied them up. "Chief, are these 2 dead about to die? Why aren't they moving?" Someone pointed at the 2 unconscious men and said. The patriarch looked at Zhou Ying after hearing this. Zhou Ying walked over. "No, they are just drugged." The others were stung by the chili-infused water. "That's good. What do you plan to do with them next?" The patriarch asked with a sigh of relief. "These are the people sent by the Qiao family. Why don't we exchange them for silver and let everyone have a good new year?" Zhou Ying hesitated for a moment and said with a smile. The patriarch was stunned for a moment, then suddenly laughed and said, "I also want to know how much these servants of the Qiao family are worth in the eyes of their master. With Elder Qiao's character, I'm afraid he won't admit it, and he won't risk losing his dignity for a few servants." Gu Qingye explained on purpose after he understood what they meant. It was fine if Elder Qiao was willing to redeem them, but otherwise, he would publicize it and make others hesitant to work for him in the future. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.